Kanahagakure, October 10th. October 10th, a day that many in Kanahagakure, the village hidden in the leaves, held in utmost hatred. Why, you may ask? Simple, because that was the day that the almighty Kyubi no Kitsune attacked the village without any warning whatsoever. Konoha's population generally believed they were above everyone else in general. After all, their village was the most powerful of the 5 great villages. If anything happened to threaten them, then their extremely powerful ninja would protect them. They considered themselves invincible, and when the Kyubi came rushing over yonder hill, they believed that it was nothing major, that the ninja could take care of it with little difficulty. As a result, they were rather sluggish in the way of retreating to the shelters. This probably has something to do with the unprecedented massive amount of civilian casualties, but Konoha researchers have yet to give up any tangible findings. I wonder why? Regardless, that was considered the worst day in their village's history since Orochimaru fled the village. Because not only were the civilian casualties raised through the damn roof, but the shinobi body count was right up there with it. Many a chunin or rookie jounin had rushed the monster head-on only to get flattened, eaten, burned to a crisp, or any combination of the 3. Genin who had disobeyed orders to get the fuck out of there had also gotten the same treatment. Most looked on the bright side of that particular score though. Less weaklings for Ibiki to sift though come chunin exams. The battle finally ended when the Yondaime Hokage, Namikaze Minato, in a combination his infinite misplaced trust and simply great power, sealed the Kyubi into his own son, Namikaze Uzumaki Naruto. Note that only 2 people in the world knew that that was his name aside from the Yondaime himself. He had summoned the great Shinigami to do the job, and as a result he ripped the man's soul out of his chest and ate it. He seemed rather pissed off at the moment. Maybe his mumblings about "interrupt my golf game with Cammy, immortal? Well, you got what you had coming, didn't you?" had something to do with his pissed off status. Not that anyone heard him say it since he was on another plane of existence, but regardless, moving on. Now then, the current score was that a few hundred people were dead, civilians and shinobi alike, and the beast was sealed into an infant. Now then, this would have been fine and dandy if it wasn't for one major factor. The fact that the recently reinstated Sandaime Hokage, Sarutobi Sasuke, couldn't keep his mouth shut and actually trusted a bunch of frightened and angry people to make a halfway reasonable decision. The boy could have lived a normal life, free of hatred, but the moment he told the people of the village that the Kyubi was sealed into the boy, all hell broke loose. The people basically rushed the balcony the old man was on, yelling, "Kill the demon," and the like, throwing empty liquor bottles at the child in question and other such violence. The Sandaime retreated to his office with the boy after ordering the ANBU to get the villagers back to their homes. The same day, a law was passed which forbade anyone from mentioning the Kyubi or its landlord to anyone in the younger generation, especially the boy himself. After all, it wouldn't do well if the boy actually knew why he was hated, would it? No, much better to let him wonder why. He couldn't know who his parents were either, no one could. IWA or Kyumo would figure out and attempt to assassinate or kidnap him. He couldn't tell the boy either. He was to be put into an orphanage. After all, you can't trust kids these days. If you told him his father was the Yondaime, he would probably go into IWA and shout "My dad was Konoha's Yellow Flash" in front of everybody, wouldn't he? Regardless of the reasons and poor judgment, the boy was put into an orphanage. It was a rather poor affair, but about half the council wanted to kill the boy, and about another third of the remainder wanted him used as a weapon. Luckily, he was the Hokage and could override the council to a degree. All he could do is hope the boy turned out well and became an excellent shinobi and a patriot for his village. 1. Mind you, that feeling of trust didn't last long. What may have broken that trust, you may ask? It was probably when the 2 ENBU he had stationed to protect the boy went into his room and attempted to stab a kunai into the infant's jugular. Normally, this would have killed him and Konoha would live in peace. However, the word "attempted" was used for a reason. This reason was that the kunai was stopped mid-thrust. Not by a hand, not by any jutsu, but by a wall of solid darkness. A wall of shadow that had risen from the ground and stopped the knife cold. The shadows of the room all writhed suddenly and descended upon the 2 ninja. There was nothing in or around the room the next morning to prove that the 2 ninja were ever there. The only evidence, if you looked really closely, was in the top right corner of the ceiling and the ground near the bed. In the top right corner of the ceiling, there was a very small bloodstain. On the ground near the bed of the sleeping child was a very small piece of triangular metal. This metal was coated in blood, and if you looked into it enough, you would realize that it was the point of a kunai knife. Konohagakure. The day after the two shinobi vanished from the orphanage was pretty hectic for all involved. They had two shinobi missing, presumed dead, and the only evidence that they were even in the orphanage that night was a bloodstain, the broken-off tip of a bloody kunai, and about a dozen eyewitness accounts. Naturally, suspicion was placed upon the demon child for their murder, but the Sandaime wouldn't hear a word against the boy. Eventually, the case was closed with the most popular theory being that unknown assassins were going to attack the boy, but were defeated and killed. They had managed to gravely injure the assassins, and the assassins fled, taking the murdered Enbu with them, but forgetting to take the boy. Once again, humanity proves that if they don't want something to exist, they have numerous means to rationalize it to conform to what they already know. And people still wonder how Orochimaru got out of the village without anyone seeing him. The years went on, and after the first dozen people went mysteriously missing, everyone eventually learned that they shouldn't attempt to murder the child in his sleep. That didn't stop them from attempting to poison the boy's food, writing insults and cruel words upon his walls and door, preparing traps to kill him, and other such nasty things. After the first few attempts on the boy failed, traps not killing him, poisons not working, assassins vanishing never to be seen again, one drunk old fool finally did it. He attacked the boy in public. Broken bottle in one hand and a knife in the other, he charged the boy in the street one day when he was ordered to go get medicine for the sick orphanage manager on October 10th. He had specific instructions to go to a specific pharmacy, which was right on one of the more populated streets during the Kyubi festival. The old man yelled out, "Die, demon," as he ran toward the boy, attempting to cut the child with a knife. But the strangest thing happened. The knife was blocked by a sudden black wall. The crowd followed the wall and found that it stemmed from the shadow of a nearby building. Before the crowd's eyes, a tendril sprouted from that wall, wrapped around the man's neck and threw him into a side alley where he lost consciousness. The boy didn't react at all. He just turned around and continued on to the probably fake pharmacy. He wasn't surprised at all. He had seen that happen before. That and much worse. The crowd, however, went absolutely ballistic. What was once a silently glaring crowd with the occasional dark muttering became a stampede, yelling, "The demon is attacking, run for your lives," and "The demon is loose," and other such kind things. The boy eventually reached the address he was given by the manager. He looked at the paper in his hand, glad that the Sandaime had taught him to read and write, and then looked at the address of the building again. They were the same. Then he looked at the building in question. It was an abandoned building that needed repairs 20 years ago. By this time, there was ivy growing on the walls up to the ceiling, and there wasn't an inch of unrotten wood to be seen. He sighed and went to return to the orphanage. The Sandaime found him on the way there. He cried out, "Naruto, there you are. Come here, would you?" The boy approached the old man, and he checked the boy over. "We need to talk, Naruto, about what happened earlier. Come on." He put his hand on the boy's shoulder and shunshine to his office. Naruto sat down in the guest chair, while old Sarutobi sat down in the larger, more comfortable Hokage's chair, and he looked at the boy. "I have heard stories, Naruto, but I want the truth directly from you. What did you do to that man in the street? Who taught you to use such abilities? Why did you attack the man in question? I need you to answer these truthfully, Naruto. If I went by the stories, you would be considered a monster by anyone's standards. So I need to know the truth, your perspective." The boy nodded and began his story. "No one really taught me anything, old man. The only one to ever teach me anything was you when you taught me how to read, write, and do simple math and that sort of stuff that everyone else got taught, but wouldn't teach me. I don't know why, but that thing earlier, that just happens. It doesn't have anything to do with me. It just happens automatically without my doing anything. The man in the street was trying to kill me, and the shadows reacted. I don't know what else to say." The boy looked sad and confused as he went on this tale, and Sandaime just said, "I have one last question, Naruto. When did this all start? When did the shadows start protecting you?" Naruto just said, "For as long as I can remember." Sarutobi knew then that this all must have been Kyubi's doing. Sarutobi looked at the boy and said, "Right. Well, Naruto, I don't want you using your abilities any more than you have to, okay? People might get jealous of you. You know, and who knows what could happen. While he said this, he was thinking, I will have to have Jiraiya look at the seal. These abilities might let the QB take over. Naruto nodded and asked Aji-san. The ancient in question looked at the boy and said, Yes, Naruto? The boy looked down at his feet and mumbled something. The Sandame leaned closer and asked what was that. Naruto looked up and asked, Aji-san, can I live on my own? I really don't like it at the orphanage. Everyone treats me badly. No one pays any attention to me. The food is awful, and I would really like it somewhere else. The old man thought about it and where he should put the boy. Well, there is that one building. He looked at the boy and said, Okay, Naruto, I think that is fair enough given what I have put you through today. The boy nodded and the Sandame said, Okay, let's go get your things. The boy looked at him and said, What things? The only stuff I own is what I am wearing right now. The old man looked at the child in surprise and decided that he would be paying the orphanage a little visit later. He took the boy's hand and said, Okay, Naruto, now come on. We have to go to your new apartment. The boy went on, holding the man's hand, a smile on his face. A few hours, a heated negotiation, and some bought furniture later, and Naruto was now the proud tenant of apartment number 392, complete with second-hand furniture, mold behind the walls, and roaches and rats if you knew where to look. The Sandame left the boy alone in his new home. The moment the door was closed, the smile vanished, and the boy's eyes gained the shadows of malice and cruelty, the false joy evaporating. Idiot old man, the boy thought, honestly believing that he wouldn't figure out everything given the right clues. Naruto, sweet, innocent, and abused Naruto, wasn't as sweet and innocent as the old ruler believed. He had been avoiding trouble his whole life. His skills in stealth and secrecy weren't to be underestimated. He knew a lot more than he let on. Since the day he learned to read, he had been sneaking into the library, learning everything he could about every last subject. He had stumbled upon a great many things that no one knew was there. Some of them were high-class jutsu, and others were secret reports that were probably put in the wrong place by tired bureaucrats. He already knew more than enough to figure out that he was the QB's vessel. The scroll on Jinchuriki that he had found had been a big tip. He had also managed to find out who his parents were. He had already decided 3 things. 1. He hated his father who had placed the village of ingrates before his own son. 2. He hated Konoha, which had made his life a living hell, had disobeyed its greatest leader's last wish, and acted as if they were living gods. And 3. He hated the Sandame. That old bastard had the gall to lie to his face about who his parents were, who his tenant was, and other such important information. There were several things that he could not fucking stand, and being lied to was high up there. He was hoping the old man suffered before he died, and he hoped even more that he was able to watch. He had learned a lot from the library. Basic taijutsu and jinjutsu, as well as ninjutsu, were found there quite easily. He also found a few scrolls on chakra control which were important, and even a few misplaced high-level ninjutsu scrolls. The one that he found most useful was the Kage Bunshin. Once he learned that his rate of learning skyrocketed, he was able to spend more time on the training grounds and less time in the library after that. He had spent every possible moment out on the fields, undergoing monstrous training regimens to strengthen his pathetic form. He planned to be powerful. He could not abide by weakness in any form. His training really jumped ahead when he first met the QB. He did not show any fear before that massive demonic fox. He showed a bit of surprise when he found out that he was actually a SHE. She appeared as a tall woman with flowing red hair, long, slender legs, and crimson eyes with slit pupils. She appeared in a black kimono with no unnecessary adornment and had 9 flowing red tails. She had a decent-sized C-cup and had fangs that protruded slightly past her lips when she smiled. Also, she had a pair of cute fox ears of top of her head instead of normal human ears. She was overall very beautiful. Boy, was he surprised when she turned out to be as sadistic as he was. She had improved his already monstrously difficult and strenuous training regimen and improved his senses as well. One major thing he enjoyed was the improved sense of smell. This was because now he could literally smell when people were lying to him. She also improved his hearing and sight. He could hear anything as far as 1,000 meters with perfect clarity if he concentrated, and his eyes were amazing. He could pick out the smallest detail in anything he looked at and could see amazing distances. He could even predict where people were going to be before they moved like the Sharingan could. Mind you, he had to do all the movement calculations in his head to do so. It wasn't automatic like the Sharingan was, nor could he copy jutsus. He had to work for his power. The best thing about it was that the senses didn't come in all at once. It happened little by little, day by day, so as not to overload him with information. The thing he loved most was that he was no longer entirely human. Kyuubi's presence in him was turning him into a Hanyu, a half-demon, due to the demonic chakra flowing through him. It wouldn't be complete until he was about 11, though. Until then, he was human. It was good to have something of a friend, though, since she would be with him until he died. They were stuck together for the rest of time, whether they liked it or not. He would gain her powers, but she would always be there even after her powers were fully assimilated, a consciousness within his own. One major benefit of half and eventually full demonhood was that he would not die by mortal means. Age, disease, and the like would never affect him, nor would poison thanks to the demonic chakra in his system burning it away. He had been showed Kyuubi's memories too. She had been around for a lot longer than anyone had guesses, and he was not the only person to ever manipulate shadows or darkness. There were many others, and he learned from them. One major thing he learned was that 3 of the associates of one of his shadowy predecessors were still alive. The predecessor in question was called Gecko Moria, and he was extremely powerful. He learned a lot from watching Kyuubi's memories of him. Powerful magics involving shadows, the importance of underlings, and much more, including his methods on creating an army of the undead, which were actually pretty good. He looked up to him more than any of his other predecessors. He was ecstatic when he heard that his 3 main lieutenants were actually still alive after all these centuries. 2 of them, Absalom and a doctor called Hogback, had remained alive by having Hogback replace their aging body parts every few years and were still out there somewhere, and he made it a point to track them down at some point. Same goes for the 3rd lieutenant, a woman called Perona the Ghost Princess. She had remained alive by forever shedding her physical body and forever remaining as a ghost. The powers of Absalom and Perona would be useful, and Hogback was a doctor to rival Tsunade, even though his methods were different. He was determined to find them one day. He had also figured out why Kyuubi attacked Konoha. She was a guardian spirit for a certain place. Not Konoha, but for Iwa. She was royally pissed off at Minato for killing her people, and she went after him determined to send him to hell. She succeeded in her goal, but she never saw this seal coming. Still, she reasoned that it could have been worse. She could have been stuck with an idiot who wore an orange jumpsuit and yelled "Believe it!" or "Databeo" after every other sentence. Instead, she got a sadistic and manipulative boy with a hunger for power and knowledge that could burn someone with their intensity. Each day he placed Jinjutsu, she taught him over his apartment and trained to the breaking point, smiling all the while as he felt his muscles contort and harden with each practice strike, as his aim gradually improved until he could take the wings off of a gnat with a kunai from 100 feet away without hurting the rest of the insect. All of this had one major flaw, though. He was lazy. Not when it came to combat or training, but when it came to doing much, he preferred to get others to do it for him. He could hold his own, but why bother if your subordinates could do it for you? The question was where he would obtain subordinates. He was going to destroy Konoha. He needed an army. However, he couldn't leave Konoha, and by the nature of his goals and the locations he was limited to, he couldn't just open a recruiting office. So he planned to take a new path to domination. The first thing was space. He knew that all of the other tenants left soon after he moved in, so all he did was hinge into some random schmuck and went to see the landlord with a plan to buy the building the demon was living in. After assuring the short and fat man that he indeed did know what he was buying, he managed to get the building at a fraction of what any other complex would cost. When he got home, he simply got out some stolen paperwork, signed some forms, and turned them in at the appropriate places, and the deed was in his name. He was now the devious owner of a shitty apartment building. He decided that he could spruce the place up later. He also bought a new wardrobe with the stipend the old fool gave him. He hated the buzzard with a passion, but Naruto was a born actor. He knew that people who pitted you were the easiest people in the world to manipulate, second only to people who admired you. And he managed to slowly get the stipend increased, and that increased his savings since he no longer needed to pay rent since he owned the building. What he decided on was a pair of black pants taped off at the ankle and a pair of shinobi sandals. He decided upon a black long-sleeve spandex number to cover his chest. It clung to his body, revealing the well-developed muscles for someone his age, and some seals made it extremely resistant to damage, not to mention comfortable. Over that went a black trench coat with an abnormally large amount of pockets for holding equipment. He departmented the collar on the trench coat up, and only the top 2 buttons buttoned, keeping his arms free, and finally, he bought a wide-brimmed black top hat to cover his blonde hair. He didn't want to be noticeable in the dark, and the hair was a dead giveaway. He also bought a large amount of ninja equipment and stole what he couldn't buy. He was quite the exceptional thief when the time called for it. Now that he didn't look like a scrawny brat that could easily be picked on. When he finally managed to get the basement stocked with the necessary materials, these included a large freezer, a metal slab complete with restraints, and a large number of medical tools. He bought a shovel and went grave digging. He came home the same night with 24 coffins and scrolls. He spent the rest of the day waiting while he prepared one of the bodies, making it stronger, more powerful, and more prepared for combat. Finally, the day came, and some idiot ANBU decided to try and kill him in his sleep. The building was dark, and so Naruto had an immense advantage. The idiot probably didn't know about his abilities since he had been having a low profile lately, and he walked into the darkness, but he never walked out. Naruto stood before the man who kneeled in front of him, arms and legs bound by solid darkness. He had wanted to try this out for a while, but he never got the chance till now. He leaned in and said to the man, "Though you are a bigot and a fool, I must thank you for being my guinea pig." The man looked up at him with hate in his eyes, only to be backhanded across the face. "Now sit still," he commanded as a spotlight shone on him. Akage Bunshin went up to the man and squatted down. The clone of the boy did what the man had never expected and pulled his shadow up off the floor. Naruto approached in the darkness and pulled out the implement he had found in one of the coffins. Probably a chunin given the status of the grave, pretty old too. The implement was a gigantic battle axe as big as he was. With his strength though, he was able to lift it, and he brought it down on the shadow near the man's feet. The axe cut through the shadow, and the man fell unconscious. He took the shadow from the clone and went into his laboratory. He looked at his creation. It was twice as tall as a normal man and was much more muscular. It had claws instead of fingernails, and there was stitching over much of its body. He took the shrunken shadow of the disillusioned ANBU and slammed it into the dead body's chest. The shadow vanished into the creature's skin, and Naruto waited with bated breath, as did the QB. Within a minute, the beast's eyes fluttered and Naruto let out a laugh. "I did it," he cried. "It works. It's alive. My first zombie is alive." He was the most happy he had ever been. This opened all sorts of doors, and he was looking forward to the fruits that the plans he could hatch with those open doors could bring. Konohagakure, Naruto's basement lab. Naruto was happy. He was very happy. Why was he so happy? Because his idea had worked. At first, the leftover personality of the ANBU he captured allowed his new creation to disobey him, but after a little while that evaporated, and the thing became totally obedient. At that point, the zombie, now known as Zombie 1, which was indicated by the small black one, which was tattooed on the left side of his face above his eye, since he wasn't going to bother to name any of his zombies save the most important ones. The zombie was released from his restraints and was coming to terms with his new undead status. Naruto smiled as he went through 4 quick hand seals and bathed the zombie in flame. He didn't flinch, nor did he ignite. Naruto smiled again. His seal had worked. Gecko Moria's zombies had 3 major weaknesses. The first was fire, but that was taken care of by a small yet powerful seal that made his zombies fireproof, which was now proved to work. The second was salt. This was a bit more vexing, for if a zombie ate salt, he was purified and the shadow he had inside the zombie would be freed. Alas, Naruto couldn't find any way around that one, but as long as only he knew, it wouldn't be any problem. The third and arguably greatest weakness was that if the shadow's donor died, then the shadow would vanish and the zombie would die too. This was dealt with by a small seal that kept the shadow in, but it had yet to be tested until now. Naruto had walked back where he left the unconscious ANBU. Removing someone's shadow had 2 effects on the person. The first was that they were automatically knocked out for at least 2 days. The second was that sunlight became anathema to them. It would dissolve their bodies like sugar in water. Naruto unsealed his axe and raised it over the man's head. He hoped his seal worked as he decapitated the man and blood spurted over the floor. Worst case scenario. He reasoned, I have a new marionette waiting for a shadow. He walked into his lab and looked for the zombie. There he was, walking around and moving, just as he left him. Naruto smiled. His seal had worked. He brought in a coffin and put the newly dead body into it. If he strengthened it and gave it a shadow, the body wouldn't dissolve, even though the shadow once belonged to someone else. The ANBU would hopefully make a good zombie in the future. Over the next few weeks, numerous cases of grave robbing were reported in Konoha. Most of the deaths were only a few years old. A good 35% of the stolen bodies were the more intact victims of the Kyuubi attack. Naruto couldn't help but see the irony of it as he examined one of the bodies in the freezer. The warriors that fell to the great demon would be reborn simply to serve the creature they were killed by. Kyuubi found it amusing as well. Naruto had been keeping a low profile lately for the most part. He had the entire building to himself, and though it was a dump, he had managed to rig a very good defense for the place. The first thing he had done was establish an iron fence around the property. The only break in this fence was a large iron gate. This gate had a very thick border, and for a good reason. Naruto had rigged an invisible and high-powered barrier around the place. Anyone and anything that touched the thing would be incinerated. The gate's borders were specifically reinforced to withstand the power of the barrier, making it the sole entrance to the place. Well, the only safe entrance. The barrier also went underground to prevent people from getting in via Doton jutsus. He didn't have a lock on the gate, though. He wanted people to get in. He just wanted them to go in through the front door. Mind you, he could open holes in the barrier for whatever reason, such as an escape route. No one saw much of the Jinchuriki over the next few months. The reason was simple. He was improving and exploring his abilities with shadows. Kyuubi asked him one day why he trained his body so hard if he was going to use the powers she gave him. One made the other obsolete. Not so, Kyuubi-chan. He answered her. True, the shadows do protect me a great deal, and despite all the attempts on my life, no one has broken them yet. But you can never be sure. I guarantee that one day I will face someone who is able to bypass that protection, and it is then that my taijutsu skills will show their worth. Kyuubi was skeptical, but she decided to trust his judgment. He hadn't been wrong yet after all. Though his taijutsu and jinjutsu abilities were excellent, he was rather weak in the ways of ninjutsu. There were about 10 or so that he found useful, but he didn't know many that he used often. He preferred to use shadows and jinjutsu rather than big flashy attacks that, for the most part, could be avoided by a simple kowarimi. Though if it came down to it, he did have some of the big flashy attacks, as he called them, on standby, just in case he needed to destroy a large or well-defended target. He was never one to leave himself without options. Better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it, was his watchword. He spent a good many of his days training his shadow abilities, preparing bodies to accept a shadow, and capturing idiot shinobi who tried to kill him. He didn't complain about the assassination attempts, not in the least. The more people who came through that door uninvited, the more shadows he could collect and the more zombies he could create. He had discovered a great many things about shadows and darkness as he trained. For example, he could create alternate dimensions within them. They took a good deal of chakra and control to create, but the result was a small spherical ball of darkness with an extremely large storage capacity. He had prepared a good deal of these storage shadows and fused them into the pockets of his trench coat. He had packed the shadows with a large amount of kunai and kunai with explosive tags attached to them. He could release a set amount of them at any time, the result being that they would fly out of the shadow at high speeds. He really enjoyed lifting up one side of the coat and releasing a bunch of kunai at his opponents. They never saw it coming since from their perspective the weapons came flying out of nowhere, and because of that surprise factor it had a very good accuracy rate. He could also reach into the shadow and pull out kunai in as many numbers as he wanted. Some of the shadows held stored rations, ninja wire, normal explosive tags, paper and ink for seals or messages, blood replenishing and soldier pills, and miscellaneous items such as books and scrolls for when he got bored. He didn't carry any pouches or bags as a result. He also had one of the storage shadows compressed and hidden in the right sleeve of his long-sleeve shirt. This one only carried one item, his battle axe. With it stored there, he could just stretch his arm in a sudden motion and will it to appear, and it would appear in his hand. Best part of it all was that he didn't need to bite his fingers to release any seals like most ninja did. He had also discovered a rather interesting feature: the fact that there were other worlds. Apparently, all darkness was connected, existing as one single thing. This darkness was what connected the various worlds to each other, and he could use his abilities to travel there if he wanted. He decided to leave other worlds alone, though. For one thing, he would be sent to one world at random, and who knows what could happen. He could end up in a world where the people breathed something other than oxygen, for example, or he could show up in a world that was completely uninhabitable. Even if he found a world that was suited for human life, he would have no sure way of getting back. He would just be tossed into the ether again, and God only knows where he would end up. So as good as a killing spree in another world to vent frustration sounded, he decided to give the whole thing a miss. Besides, if worst came to worst and he ended up captured or defeated, then he could use that as an ever-present escape route. It was wise to always be prepared. As the weeks and months passed and Naruto's strength grew, fewer and fewer people were both brave and stupid enough to try and hurt him. He said that he was happy about that to the Sandaime, but he really hated that. If people stopped coming for him, he couldn't acquire new shadows without drawing in unwanted attention. The last thing he wanted was for people to find out about his budding army of the undead. Before they outnumbered the villagers at least, after that who cared? Speaking of the zombies, they were about 50 in number now. About 30 of them were warriors, soldiers meant for combat like the first zombie was. Of the rest, they were all made special. They were like the normal zombies, but they were trapped in portraits. They could leave these portraits at will and could also travel between other frames that were made the same way. They could be used as a warning system and a defense, since no one ever expects enemies to come out of a damn painting, do they? Since he always carried a picture frame with him, he could always be aware of important events since they would warn him immediately. This frame was small, about the size of a pocket watch, but he wasn't really worried about the visual on it since he could hear the zombie in it just fine. There were only 2 zombies not directly made for combat. The first was zombie number 21. This one he made for recon outside of his home. It ended up as a mixture between a man and a bat. Since zombie number 21 was rather long for someone he actually had conversations with, he just named the guy Hilden. The other zombie was not made for either combat, nor recon, or any other purpose in battle. Rather, this one was made for around-the-house work. She was the only female zombie, and as a result he tried to at least make her look good. She was of medium height and slender build. She had red eyes and bright blue hair. She was rather quiet, but very loyal and obedient. She basically took the position of maid since the other zombies couldn't cook or clean to save their lives, while this zombie had a good talent for it. He decided to name her Ray. She also knew some hand-to-hand combat in case the house was ever intruded upon, and she found them before he did. 1. He still had to deal with the new problem of people fearing him. It was good, don't get me wrong, but now there were very few, if any, new shadow donors. He could always abduct the villagers, but that would be a rather high-profile action. There was already an investigation as to what happened to the 50 or so people that had already vanished, not that they would ever find anything. He made his decision on what to do and approached the Sandaime with it. Despite the fact that he hated the buzzard, he still needed his permission and knew just how to play the man like a harp. The main issue was getting him to agree to let him leave the village. The Sandaime had already given him several basic manuals and guides for the ninja business, so he used the need for an escape from the hatred as the main excuse. He posed it as a training trip. He would stay at a cave near the village and train there for a year. It would act as survival training in addition to whatever work he got in on his skills. At least, that was what he told the man. Coaxing people to do what you want was a subtle art. He didn't approach his request directly, for one thing. He slowly built up to it over the conversation. The subtle yet fake flattery in his words and tone, the innocent and abused mentality he portrayed, all of it was to convince the bastard to let him do what he wanted. Before long, the man agreed, and while he thanked the man politely, he was making fun of the bastard in his thoughts. The old man only had one last issue to raise. You know, Naruto-kun, if you leave the village for a year, you will have to enter the academy a year late. Naruto looked at the aged leader and gave an enormous fake smile. I know, Aji-san, but the training I get done will make up for it. Well, if you're sure then. I am Ji-san, see you later. The boy shuddered in his mind. He hated acting like that, but he had to maintain his facade until he became a genin at least. Then he could let a bit more bloodlust show. A year away from Konoha was just what he needed. Sure, he would be watched, but whatever the man tried could be bypassed without too much trouble. He would leave a variation of the Kage Bunshin behind to fool the crystal ball and the ANBU that would probably check up on him at least once a week. He packed a map of the elemental countries and in his bag and sealed a large freezer into a scroll as he prepared to leave the village. He wasn't planning on staying anywhere near Konoha. He had shadows to collect, bodies to prepare, secrets to sell, and most importantly, people to find. He needed people better suited to do certain jobs than he was, and he had several things to find for his plans to be a success. One thing at a time, one thing at a time. He had patience after all. He could wait a few years for his plans to work. Konohagakure, the demon house, as the locals call it at least. Naruto was preparing to leave for his one-year training trip. At least that's what everyone thought he was leaving on. The real truth was a bit less pleasant for Konoha. He had more or less everything he needed. Food, weaponry, a few hundred scrolls and books on the ninja arts that he had not read, yet recently filched from the areas of the library people weren't normally allowed into, all disguised as lower-level techniques via jinjutsu. Zombie picture frame, check. Map of the elemental countries, check. A large freezer sealed within scroll to reserve any powerful bodies he happened to collect, check. Immense power, check. Hatred for most human beings, check. Okay, he was all set to go. As he prepared to go, he gave some last-minute instructions to Ray, who was to keep things organized while he was gone. Basically, keep the place clean, repair any damage since the building was still rather decrepit, send a picture zombie his way should anything go wrong, and wear that French-made outfit more often. He made several seals on the inside of the gate as he left the property, sealing in the place in a near-impenetrable sphere of energy. Zombies didn't need to eat or drink, so no supplies were needed to be left behind, and he didn't really want anyone going into his house when he wasn't there. His leaving Konoha wasn't that much of an event. He agreed with the Sandaime that he should leave in secret, so the old man cast a small illusion on him so that he looked like someone else, so that he could just walk out without any fuss from the civilians and gate guards. Not that he needed to, but the Sandaime still believed that his skills were low genin level at best, a misconception that Naruto readily encouraged. After all, the most deadly enemy is the one that you overlook. Within 2 hours of leaving Konoha, he had reached the cave that he told the Sandaime that he would be staying at for the next year. It was actually a pretty good-sized hole in the rock, a bit bigger than he thought it was. He put down most of the scrolls and books and removed the jinjutsu over himself and replaced it with one of his own, which covered the cave area. This was to fool the Sandaime's crystal ball into thinking everything was normal. He would need something a little more elaborate for the living eyes and ears that would be watching him at the Hokage's behest. He had been wanting to try this out for a while actually. He turned and faced his own shadow, a deep gray against the stone, and raised his hand toward it, fingers spread. He said only 2 words, "Come forth," and a black hand rose from the center of the shadow. The hand pushed against the floor, and before long an entire person emerged from Naruto's shadow, which vanished as soon as the creature fully emerged. This being looked exactly like Naruto. The only difference was that his entire body was pitch black, and his eyes and mouth shone bright white against that darkness. This being was Naruto's shadow. It was mentally much weaker than its master, but it was extremely stronger physically as well as amorphous and immortal. All he had to do was give it orders, and the shadow would obey them to the best of its abilities. His orders were simple: take my form exactly and train here until I return. Read the books and scrolls I leave for you, and do not do anything suspicious. Do you understand? The creature nodded, and Naruto was pleased. The shadow would act just like a Kage Bunshin. He would learn what it did as he went to sleep each night. There was only one detail to take care of first. Naruto went to the mouth of the cave and looked out into the sunlight of the dawn just peeking out from the horizon. He gently, carefully stuck the tip of his right little finger into the light and smiled as it didn't dissolve. Apparently, he could separate himself from his shadow and not be harmed by the sun. He had separated from his shadow before and practiced all sorts of moves with it. With them both working together, they were a powerful team. But Naruto hadn't dared to reveal himself to the sun without a shadow until now, and he found that his fears were unfounded. He watched as the shadow's color changed until he was looking at an exact copy of himself. He nodded to the shadow and left the cave, heading into the forest. He knew his way around Konoha's forests rather well from his sneaking about at night, so he knew right where to go to begin his search, away from Konoha and to the north, in the direction of Awagakure. He walked into a tree's shadow and closed his eyes. He mumbled under his breath, Kagehoku, shadow walk, and vanished into the darkness, sinking into the shadow beneath him. When he emerged from that darkness, he was near the border to Tsuchi no Kuni. He really loved the Kagehoku. He could transport from one shadow to another anywhere in the world in a moment, as long as he had been there before by more normal means. He had never been out of Hai no Kuni, so he had to do with the border instead. He crossed the border and made his way into Tsuchi no Kuni, Kyuubi's ancestral home, the enemies of Konoha, and if his information was right, the location of the den of the esteemed Dr. Hogback. 1 week later, Naruto was staying in a small yet comfortable hotel about 50 miles in from the border. So far he had no luck locating Hogback, but it was to be expected. Tsuchi no Kuni was a big place, and graced by half a dozen mountain chains, and Hogback's hideaway could be almost anywhere in it. The only places he could be sure Hogback wasn't was within 20 miles of the borders and within 50 miles of Awagakure no Sato. Those places were heavily guarded by Iwa Nin. Aside from those locations, Hogback could be almost anywhere in the country, though he probably wasn't in any town or city. After a night of thinking, he came to the conclusion that Hogback's most likely position was in the mountains somewhere, probably near a place where they had a large graveyard, so that he could continue his exploration of the human body's mysteries. Naruto unrolled a newly stolen map of Tsuchi no Kuni that showed every last town and known settlement, and was rather dismayed at what he found. Apparently, there were at least a dozen villages that fit the bill in each mountain chain, and if he was right, Hogback and Absalom could be in a hidden place anywhere within 5 miles of any of them, which was probably heavily defended. He knew finding any of Moria's old compatriots would be difficult, but come on. Eventually, Naruto decided that he really had no choice but to either search each and every one of the places he could be, over 50 villages and the lands surrounding them, or he could develop some method to search every place at once. He ground his teeth in frustration. If it was this hard to find Hogback and Absalom, who were thankfully traveling together since Absalom needed the doctor to replace his aging body parts with new ones every so often, then it would be almost impossible to locate Perona, who didn't even have a physical form. Wait a second, he thought. Absalom needs Hogback to replace his aging body parts every few years. Of course, Absalom's body is composed of mostly animal parts, mostly predators. If any of the villages listed have a large population of dangerous predators, especially ones that may have shrunk noticeably, then that would probably be the place. He eagerly looked at the map again, taking out a book of Iwa's natural wildlife. There were unique animals and plants in every country, so he had bought such books in case he found one. He checked each place in the book's index, looking for the most dangerous and powerful animals near each of them, especially ones that have experienced a declination of population over the last few years. He found some good news and some bad news when the search was complete. He had managed to narrow down the likely possibilities from over 50 to below 10, 7 to be exact, but those 7 were equally likely to be the place, and they were all very far apart. He had no real choice but to check each village individually, as most people from the Nara clan would say Mindokus. 3 days later, 40 miles from last town, Naruto was in his hotel room, grinning like a madman. Why was he so happy, one would ask. The answer would be that he had found an extremely useful piece of information. Iwa had a Jinchuriki of its own. Mind you, her abilities were not really meant for combat, but he didn't really care about that. Her abilities were in the way of recon over an extremely wide area, such as an entire country. If he could get her on his side, then he could find Hogback and Absalom within a few hours. She was also supposed to be monstrously talented at Jinjutsu. There were only 2 problems with that. The first was that because Iwa was horrible to her, as it was for all Jinchuriki, she was a rather meek and easily intimidated individual. This was a bit of a problem because he liked people to be able to think for themselves. It would also make her extremely distrusting of anyone, especially people she had never met before. The second was that though IWA was extremely abusive of her, it was still protective as all hell when it came to her. It would be difficult to get her to come to his side, extremely difficult, and just as difficult to steal her away. If he succeeded, he would have to vanish from the country, and quickly since the entire country would be swarming with ninja looking for her, and more importantly, him. He would have to observe the girl for a while and find a good way to either deceive or coerce her into accepting his offer to come with him. He looked at a picture of the girl that he had taken from the hitman he had beaten almost to death for the information on the Jinchuriki. He had heard him mention to a friend that he was hired to kill her and took action. He killed the fool once he had finished talking. The girl wore small square glasses and had short red-brown hair, very plain looking, and was supposedly extremely smart though shy. Rather bookish too. She was supposed to be 15 years old. He looked at the girl's name before destroying the dossier. He muttered to himself, Kikukawa, Yukino, Jinchuriki of the Rokubi no Kabaiju, memorizing the name and picture. He had a new target. 1. 2 weeks later, outside of Awagakure. Naruto was holed up in a decent-sized cave about a mile and a half outside of IWA. He had been spying on the local Jinchuriki Yukino for the last 2 days, trying to learn about her, her fears, her preferences, how she fought, and everything he could. The more he could appeal to her when they met, the more likely it was that she would come with him. So far he had learned quite a bit. She was tremendously powerful in Jinjutsu, stronger than most Kages. The only people that would be able to come anywhere close to matching her in Jinjutsu would be Uchiha Itachi and that chicken Konoha that could make Jinjutsu real before Yuhi Kurenai sealed her powers away. Her illusions were as unbreakable and traumatizing as the Tsukuyami. He knew that if he was caught in one of her illusions, it would be really bad. The only bit about that was that she was too meek and shy to use her Jinjutsu abilities against those that would harm her. He really couldn't figure that one out. Though she was possibly the strongest Jinjutsu master in centuries, maybe ever, she was low Jounin level in everything else. He had found out about a decent bit of her life too. She was extremely introverted and didn't like confrontation, which was to be expected given her abandoned by parent status and was listed as a Tokubetsu Jounin in Iwa's books. The only reason someone hadn't killed her by now was because of her one and only friend, Suzushiro Haruka. Unlike her friend Yukino, she was loud and aggressive, and fiercely protective of her friend. As a result, the blonde Jounin was considered demonically tainted by her peers. After she befriended Yukino, she quickly became her only friend. He also noticed that Haruka wasn't incredibly loyal to IWA either. He knew that if he was going to convert Yukino, Haruka was the key to it. If he could rope Haruka into going with the idea, then the Jinchuriki would follow. This was only cemented when he learned one crucial fact about the shy Jinchuriki that no one, not even her friend, knew. The fact that Kikukawa Yukino was head over heels for Suzushiro Haruka. He could slightly understand that. After all, the blonde Jounin was the only one who ever helped her in the least. He knew that if he could get Haruka on his side somehow, then the Jinchuriki would remain loyal. It was one more person than he intended to carry off, but it was worth it. The only question was how to use Yukino's love to his best advantage. He had gotten his chance a week later, the day that Suzushiro Haruka was killed. It was supposedly a training accident. That was the story spread, but Naruto knew the truth. What was supposedly a friendly spar between coworkers was actually a well-thought-out assassination by a Jinchuriki hater to redeem the tainted one's soul. When Yukino found out, she went into a depressive slump and retreated to her home, and the only people that had seen her since was the mob that attacked her home the next day to remove the taint once and for all. Yukino, in her depressed state, was apparently more willing to shatter minds with her illusions than her normal self was, judging by the new additions to the local asylum. Naruto thought of a way to bring both Yukino and Haruka to his side and shatter their frail loyalties to IWA in one fell swoop. He grinned as he snuck into the Jinchuriki's apartment one day after the accident. The place was a lot dirtier and unkempt than it normally was. As he looked around the interior, he could hear a slight crying from a nearby room. He made sure that he stayed quiet as he neared the room. The last thing he wanted was for her to attack him. He wasn't all that sure he could win against her if she did. He found her crying her eyes out, muttering things such as, "Why, Haruka? Why did you leave me?" and other such things. He entered the room without a sound and used the shadows to cloak himself from sight as he spoke to her. Yukino had spent the last day and a half in utter depression. Her best friend, her only friend, the love of her life, even though she knew that she would never return her feelings, was gone, killed by accident. She couldn't believe that life could be so unfair. She was utterly consumed by despair and hopelessness. She was completely shocked when she heard a voice from nowhere whispered into her ear. "Why are you crying?" the voice asked her. Her sadness turned to anger at the voice. Who was this person to wonder why she was crying? Wasn't it obvious? She growled to the voice. "Why do you think?" "She's gone. My Haruka-chan is gone. She left me behind, just like everyone else. How can I go on without her? She was the only reason I had left for living." Her voice was loud and harsh at first, but settled into a whimper as the sentence ended. The voice returned, "What would you do if I said that I could give Haruka back to you?" She looked around for the voice in supreme rage. How dare this person, this thing, toy with her emotions, toy with her love for Haruka? She would find whoever it was and tear their mind asunder, and she told the voice as such. The voice returned, filled with mirth. "Why would you destroy your one chance to have Haruka return to you? I do not joke. Resurrection is within my abilities. Simply ask me to, and I will return Suzushiro Haruka to you, just as she was before she was assassinated." Yukino was stunned. Haruka was assassinated? Murdered? She couldn't believe it. She asked the voice, her own voice filled with uncharacteristic rage, "Who did it? Who took Haruka-chan away from me? Why would they hurt her when she was so beautiful, so perfect?" The voice returned once more. "She was killed because of her association with you. It was done on the orders of the Tsuchikage. Why do you think someone who Haruka had never talked to before challenged her to a match and used an abnormally long kunai that could easily strike an accidentally fatal blow that he had never been seen using before? It was planned by your village. It was a Wagakure itself that took Haruka from you. No one else is to blame." Yukino was once more distraught. She picked up a knife and yelled with fresh tears staining her eyes. "Haruka-chan was killed because of me. It's my fault she's dead." She drove the knife toward her chest, but a tendril of shadow struck the knife from her hand. The voice returned, "It is not your fault Haruka is dead. It is a Wagakure's fault. Even so, it does not matter, as I can bring your Haruka back to you, if you want me to." Yukino looked up to where she thought the voice was coming from, which was about 10 feet to the right of where Naruto actually was, and said, "And what would you want in return, if you were able to do so? Nothing comes for free, I know that much." Though she didn't know it, Naruto smiled at that. Even depressed to borderline insanity, she was still sharp as a razor. The voice returned and whispered to her, "You are correct, there is a catch, but it is insignificant to what you would gain in return. In exchange for your Haruka's return, I only ask for your loyalty, your obedience to my commands. You will leave IWA with me, and your Haruka-chan may come as well if you want. I can assure you that if you come with me, you will one day have your revenge on a Wagakure no Sato." Yukino considered it for a long while. If she left IWA, then there would be no one to defend her. But then again, IWA had hurt her more than anyone else ever had or ever could. She decided to agree to the deal. She didn't know what would happen, but it would definitely be better than staying here. She spoke, and Naruto smiled when he heard her reply, when she said, "You have a deal." Yukino looked around and said, "I have a question though, just who are you?" A small figure stepped from the shadows, and she jumped when it did. She didn't detect anything from there. She didn't hear any heartbeat or its footsteps. She didn't sense any chakra until the figure moved either. Her jaw dropped when the figure was revealed to be a boy no more than 7 or 8 years old. He said to her, "My name is Uzumaki Naruto. Now then, let's get going. We'll have to get Haruka's body back for this to work." He walked out the door, with the bookish Jinchuriki behind him, still astounded at both the boy's age and the authority he apparently had. 1 hour later, Jinjutsu hidden cave 40 miles from IWA. They were hiding out in one of Naruto's portable labs, prepping for the resurrection. Haruka's nude form was on a metal table, and Naruto had put on a lab coat, mask, and gloves, and was cleaning a bunch of scientific/medical instruments. Yukino just sat in the corner, amazed at what had happened in the last 2 hours for her. Flashback no jutsu. Naruto and Yukino had gotten to the morgue in one piece. It was about 9 at night, so no one saw them. He had asked her about the security around the morgue since a hidden village's morgue was always well defended. Dead ninja bodies were flesh-colored gold nowadays. The techniques that could be developed and the jutsu and bloodline stolen could do tremendous damage to a ninja village if their morgue was successfully raided. As a result, the only places that were more defended than the morgue was the local Kage's residence, the reservoir in Sunagakure, and any jutsu libraries in the village. Aside from those places, the morgue was the most well-defended place. Yukino had told him what she knew. Since the Third Ninja War, the number of high-quality shinobi was lowered by a lot and IWA was still dealing with the damage. As a result, there were only 10 high Chunin-level ninja guarding the place from the inside, and the 5 doctors that held the night shift were all high Chunin to low Jounin-level shinobi. Quite a bit of security for a 3-story, completely square building, especially considering the fact that there were alarms linked to every other door and cameras everywhere. One slip-up and half the ninja population of the village would be raining upon them like bats from hell. Naruto, though, had a simple solution to alarms, cameras, and reinforcements already thought up. He held his hands in front of him, palms facing each other about 6 inches apart. Shadows began to coalesce between his hands, forming a small sphere. He showed the ball to Yukino and explained. This sphere, he began, will envelop a large space and immensely speed up time inside of it. An hour in there becomes a minute out here, you see? She nodded, and he continued. This solves the problem of reinforcements, but the cameras, alarms, and other non-human defenses in there will be gone too, since everything electronic will short out upon contact with the sphere. The stuff comes back online when the sphere is gone, though. Lightning jutsu can't be used in here either. They just don't work, and no one can get in or out without my help. The plan is this. I put this little guy around the building, and we storm the place. We get the soon-to-be not late Haruka's body, and we hightail it out of here. Sound good? Before she could nod, he pressed the sphere between his palms. A second later, he let it go, and the darkness spread from his hands, enveloping the morgue and everything within 20 feet of the building, the 2 of them included. According to Yukino, there were 4 guards inside the entrance hall, so he went and prepared for them. A very small ball of solidified shadow formed on the tips of the first 4 fingers on his right hand. She asked what those were for, and he looked at her, grinned, and showed her his fingers one by one. As each sphere became visible to her, he said, 1 dead ninja, 2 dead ninja, 3 dead ninja, 4. Then he turned to the door, said beneath his breath, ding ding, round 1. Before he kicked the door down and flicked his hand toward the 4 ninja that rushed them the moment the door opened. The 4 balls of condensed darkness rushed from his hand and pierced through the chests of the 4, each appearing to be nothing but a line that stretched from his hand and went through his opponents before disappearing into the wall. The 4 ninja fell without a sound, and 4 small craters decorated the wall around the receptionist, who was looking frail and helpless. That was to be expected since she was the only civilian in the building. He approached the woman and casually leaned against the counter, a smile on his face, and asked her, where would I look to find the body of the late Suzushiro Haruka? Like he didn't just kill 4 people like it was nothing. She shakily pointed to a chart which listed in which freezer a body was in, depending on what letter their name started with. There was a separate freezer for the unidentified. The S's were in freezer 5. He looked at the terrified secretary and said, thank you, before a shadow came from the ceiling, wrapped around her neck, and hoisted her up. He shrugged at the hanging secretary, said, nothing personal, and walked toward the freezer section. They encountered 2 more Chunin on their way to the freezer in question, who made the bad move of attempting to use right-on jutsu. Given the treaty between Kumo and IWA during the war, IWA ninja picked up a few lightning techniques, and vice versa. Since Doton Jutsu were too wide-range to use here, they went to the only thing they knew that would work in any other circumstance. Naruto thought the look on their faces was priceless when they looked at their hands in shock when their jutsu didn't work. Their heads were cut off from tendrils of darkness that originated from the natural shadows of the walls before they knew what had happened. When they got to the freezer, Naruto cut off the lock with a small blade of shadow that extended from his fingers and found a large room with a bunch of square cubicles lining a wall. He looked to Yukino and said, you keep watch. She nodded and stood a small way back from the door as Naruto cut the lock off of one cubicle opened it, and checked the tag on the toe of the body inside before moving to the next one. On the seventh one, he checked the tag, smiled, and said, "We have a winner," as he rolled out the steel sheet that the body rested on. He called to Yukino, who came quickly and told her to pick up the body and follow him, which she did, albeit with some difficulty. Naruto led them to a shadow in the corner and grabbed her arm. He muttered under his breath, "Kagehoko," just as 4 Chunin and 3 Jounin-level doctors rushed inside the room. A moment and a whirl of nausea later, and they were in a strange cave. Naruto took a scroll from his coat and told her to put a Jin Jutsu over the cave mouth. By the time she was done, he had unsealed a small building and carried the body inside. And then they were where they were now. Flashback, no Jutsukai. Naruto, after dressing in normal scientific/medical clothing, removed the white blanket covering Haruka from view. The moment he did, Yukino had a massive, near debilitating nosebleed. Modest C cup, not too bad by anyone's standards. Bright blue eyes, currently closed, and a full head of blonde curls. The only thing marring her body was the thin yet extremely deep wound in her side. Naruto went through a few hand seals for an examination jutsu and put his hand over her chest. He quickly copped a feel when Yukino was cleaning the blood off of her upper lip, and she didn't notice at all. After a second or two, he took his hand away and whistled. Damn, whoever did this knew what they were doing. He did an awesome job. One stab, clean, right between the ribs and right through the heart. I couldn't have done it better myself. Okay, this is going to be more work than I thought. We are going to need a transplant. Yukino looked at the diminutive blonde and asked, "Transplant? I thought you were going to resurrect her." Naruto pulled off his gloves and looked at the girl like she just said the moon was made out of cheese and said, "Yes, but I think you don't want her resurrected into a body that has been fatally wounded. I need to fix up the wound that killed her before I do it, or she'll just die again. Her heart is beyond repair. Everything else is easily mended. As a result, I will need to do a transplant. Now if you'll excuse me." He walked outside of the small building, and she reluctantly followed him outside, taking one more look at the body of Haruka. Naruto had taken a scroll from the coat he left inside the portable lab and unsealed a large freezer. It was as big as the laboratory, easily. He opened the door and motioned for her to follow him inside, which she did. She wasn't prepared for what was inside. There was the massive cold, of course. It was about 10 degrees Fahrenheit inside the freezer, but there were at least 50 bodies inside, hanging from meat hooks, men and women, young and old. He looked at her and just asked, "What's her blood type?" Yukino was shocked for a moment, but got a hold of herself and answered, "Type AB." He nodded and went through the bodies, eventually choosing a rather busty female that had taken a rather nasty fall, given the angle of her neck. He took out a kunai, and without missing a beat, cut through the skin of her chest, revealing the breastbone. He charged his chakra into the blade and cut through the bone like butter. He carefully spread the two halves of bone and reached in, taking hold of the necessary organ, and with the knife cut each of the connecting veins and arteries that led to the organ. He pulled out a perfectly functional, if a bit cold, human heart and walked out, Yukino following. He sealed up the freezer and went back inside the lab. He prevented his fellow Jinchuriki from entering, though. He needed a sterile environment. As a result, Yukino was stuck sitting outside the door listening to the sound of flesh and bone parting, the clinking of metal instruments, and the scent of cold blood for about an hour before the door opened again and her love's mysterious savior stepped out again, medical smock covered in blood. He motioned for her to come in, which she eagerly did. The room was just as it had been before, only there was more blood and a brand new scar on Haruka's chest. The wound that killed her was also gone. There was a lot of blood on the instruments, especially the scalpel. There was also a pierced heart in a jar. She looked at him and asked, "How did she recover so quickly? There should still be stitches, and the wound should be open." He looked at her and said, "Demonic chakra, one of the best healing agents there is." She looked at him in shock and asked, "How do you have access to demonic chakra? Only a bijou could use it." He looked at her again and said only one thing, a bijou, or a Jinchuriki. She looked at him open-mouthed. She shakily asked, Just who are you?" He looked at the completely astonished girl and said, "Uzumaki Naruto, Jinchuriki of the Kyubi no Kitsune. Pleased to meet you." The already astounded girl almost went into shock. Not only a Jinchuriki, but the container of Kyubi, the strongest of the 9. No wonder he is so strong, she thought. He knelt by the body and said, "Now we begin the resurrection." He began a low chant in a language she did not know. It was twisting and writhing. She couldn't explain it. About 2 hours later, he was still chanting. She gathered up the courage and asked, "Is this really necessary?" He stopped his chant and looked at the girl before standing up and saying, "No, not really." She was surprised by this and couldn't come up with a response. He smirked and said, "Okay, enough joking around. Time for the real thing." He took a deep breath and reached down and touched her shadow, his hand sliding into it as though it were water. He thought the process to himself as he worked. The only thing you need for a human is a body and soul. The body is already supplied in this case. All we need now is her soul. What most people don't know is that the shadow and the soul are connected. This is why a zombie would die if the original owner of its shadow died before I put my seal on it. The process of zombification is simply putting a powerful shadow, and therefore a powerful soul, into a powerful body. Creating an even greater warrior than the two would be on their own given a lower quality counterpart. Resurrection, though, is different from zombification since I need a specific shadow to go with the now functional body. When a person dies, their soul, their memories and feelings separate from the shadow and move on. The soul still leaves traces on the shadow, though, that gradually vanish as time goes on. A resurrection of a person only a day or two old is easy. After a week has gone by, though, the soul is irretrievable. The body has to be functional too, otherwise the person would just die again. She is only a day or two dead, so it shouldn't be too hard. There. The moment he found the remnants, he quickly followed the trail to the soul, wherever it was. He slowly pulled it out of the shadow's darkness, a small rainbow-colored orb. "There's a good girl," he muttered to himself, and he slowly pressed the orb into the girl's chest and waited. A few moments later, her eyes flew open and she took in a ragged breath like a person who was borderline drowning. She looked around wildly, shocked and confused. Yukino was overjoyed. She yelled out, "Haruka-chan," and rushed forward, but stopped when Naruto knocked out the newly revived Haruka with a chop to the neck. Yukino was surprised and instantly went on guard. He looked up at her and said, "Relax, I didn't hurt her. Her soul still needs to acclimatize to being alive again, so she needs to sleep for at least a day. If she gets too excited before then, it could shatter the feeble link between body and soul and kill her again. Anyway, I did as I promised. I resurrected your friend. Now for you to hold up your end of the bargain." She was rather nervous at the thought of what the strange boy would ask her to do, but was surprised at what he asked. He gave her a picture of a very strange-looking man and said, "I need you to find him. Locate Dr. James Hogback. Jinjutsu Hidden Cave." Naruto handed Yukino a picture that he had gotten from Kyubi's memories of what Hogback probably looked like. It was really a Jinjutsu on a piece of cardboard, but that wasn't really important. Yukino examined the picture. The man was of decent height and broad. His face was rather memorable. Long, pointed ears, vampire-like fangs, and he had a very long and pointed nose. His lips were a dark shade of purple for some reason, and he wore completely black, circular glasses like the Aburame clan were prone to do that completely covered his eyes. His hair was shoulder length, lank and pitch black, and he had a spiraling tattoo on his left shoulder. His forehead was very large due to balding at some point in his life. He wore some sort of black fur clothing over his back, a fishnet shirt, and normal-looking black pants. He also wore rubber gloves that reached his forearms and boots that went to mid-shin. Yukino looked at the boy and told him that it shouldn't be too hard to find him if he was in Tsuchi no Kuni. He nodded and gave her a list of the points where he most likely was. She took the list and got to work. Naruto watched in surprise at Yukino's abilities. She closed her eyes and murmured something under her breath, and a hexagonal mirror appeared in front of her from nothing. As he watched, large green tendrils of plant-like material emerged from the ground. There were probably 1 to 2 dozen of them, and each of them sprouted a few dozen strange pod-like seeds that broke away from the main plant and floated in midair. Before long, there were a few thousand of them throughout the cave. He examined one of the seeds quickly. Though the plant was biological, it had a strangely mechanical eye, like a camera lens in the middle of the broader side. This was before the thousands of seeds rushed through the cave opening. He looked toward Yukino and saw that the mirror she was looking at from before had turned into more. There were about 24 identical mirrors around Yukino, which she moved in front of them both, the sides easily fitting together to make a single gigantic faceted mirror. Each facet had a different image upon it, and they changed at a rapid pace. She told him that each seed had a built-in jinjutsu that allowed it to become invisible to normal people. He watched the multifaceted mirror in complete shock as each view moved at incredible speeds, moving where Yukino wanted them to go. The view from it all quickly made him a bit sick, and he looked away. Yukino had obviously had a lot of practice at this since she wasn't affected at all. He was absolutely amazed. He had no idea that a technique like this existed. The possibilities completely shocked him. They were endless. Entire countries could be watched all at once. Escape from Yukino's network was almost impossible. If it was in her range, which was amazingly broad, she would be able to find it within a few minutes. Before long, the Great Mirror showed a complete view of every major event in the country. There was a riot in a smaller town because of a corrupt governor. The daimyo was just waking up with a woman that was not his wife. Iwa was swarming with ninja, sending them out in droves. Rare animals fed upon certain plants that they liked in the mountains. It was simply too much for the boy to believe, and if he wasn't watching it with his own eyes, he wouldn't have believed it. Inside of his mind, Kyubi was just as amazed. She had no idea that the Rokubi was strong or smart enough to come up with something like this. It was 1 hour of searching later before they found him. Dr. James Hogback, greatest doctor of his time and one of the 2 greatest medics alive, the other being Tsunade herself. He was currently drinking a cup of tea on a mountain ledge, apparently enjoying the sunrise until one looked at the town below. They were having a mass burial. 10 men dead due to a building collapsing. He put down the teacup and wrote something down on a piece of paper before walking straight through the mountainside, disappearing from sight. Naruto asked Yukino where that was. Apparently, it was a small mountain town called Bubyuk in the Fujino Mountains. He inwardly cringed. That was about 10 miles away from one of the towns he had marked. He thought more about how he had walked through a mountain, though. He came upon the solution after a minute or two. It must have been Absalom. He had the ability to make anything invisible, as long as he was able to touch it. Hiding a cave entrance would have been too simple for him. He told Yukino that they would wait for one day so that Haruka could get her bearings, and then they would go. Yukino nodded and marked the invisible cave's location on the map before letting the mirrors disappear, the seeds with them. The massive plant stalks sank back into the ground as Naruto laid out a tent for each of them before going to bed. Raiding a well-defended building, heart transplant surgery, and bringing back the dead really takes it out of a guy. After a few moments, Yukino went to sleep too in the other tent, hardly believing that any of this was real. 9 hours later. Naruto woke up exactly 9 hours later. It was currently 10 a.m. He quickly got up and sealed up the tent, then went over to wake up Yukino. A minute or so of shaking her shoulder later, and he got bored and nailed her with a low-powered sueton, Mizurapa. She woke up in a flash. He silently handed her a towel, and she glared at him as she took it. Her mind was a little out of order. She had the weirdest dream where Haruka died and a small child agreed to resurrect her if she swore loyalty to him, which she did, and they raided the morgue for Haruka's body, and he brought her back to life right in front of her. She had abandoned her home, if she could call it that. Then she looked around the cave and realized that her dream wasn't a dream and glared at the boy who handed her a towel after soaking her in water. She got up and dried off to the best of her ability as Naruto sealed up the tent that he had lent her. She put her glasses back on after drying her face and looked at the boy, actually studying him. He was young, no more than 8 or 9 years old at most. He wore a shirt of a black rubber material and had durable pants. He wore standard-issue shinobi sandals and had a large trench coat. He didn't put his arms in the sleeves, but rather wore it like a cloak, with his hands and arms free inside of it. He had the top 2 buttons done, and the collar was flipped up, covering his face from the sides and back. He wore leather gloves that reached mid-forearm and a black hat of a strange design. It was cylindrical and went up 3 inches from the brim and was pitch black. Its brim was wide and slightly glossed so that the reflection from any light would make it hard to look him in the face. The entire thing was apparently designed to be difficult to recognize his features. She noticed one thing about him that had slipped her notice before. He didn't have a shadow. The thing just wasn't there. His size combined with what he had shown her forced her to ask a question. How did you get all of those people into that freezer? Where did you get them? And how did you get them onto those hooks? He turned to look at her and said, as for where I got them, well, I have been collecting them as I traveled through Tsuchi no Kuni, 2 or 3 from each town and anyone I met on the road. I studied them for blood type, any possible diseases, kekei genkai, or anything else that made them special. As for how I got them from place to place, well, without any obvious movement from him, a large black claw emerged from the darkness of the deeper areas of the cave. Well, I have a lot of hands. Now come on, we have to go get your friend. He walked on toward the portable laboratory, Yukino hurrying to follow him. He may be small, but that little bastard was quick. He opened the door and walked inside, Yukino following him as he approached the still sleeping Haruka. Wait, she cried. Didn't you say that if you woke her up too early she might die? Naruto looked back at his fellow Jinchuriki and said, yes, but the amount of time necessary for the body and soul to acclimatize varies from person to person. She wasn't dead for very long, so the time for acclimatization shouldn't be too long. I am going to check and see if she can be safely woken up yet, and if she can't, then I will get an accurate time as to when it should be safe. Then he turned back and plunged his hand into her shadow before the bespectacled girl could say anything more. He felt around the darkness of Haruka's shadow. While her soul is definitely here, that's a good sign. Everything seems to be lined up correctly. Wait, there's one. A spot where the shadow and body haven't connected to the soul. Let's see now. There are 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, 4 spots not linked up yet. Yeah, it's definitely not safe, but the spots are minor, so it shouldn't be too long. He pulled his hand out from the shadow and opened his eyes. Yukino asked him, well, is it safe to wake her up yet? He looked at the girl and said, not yet, but it won't be too long, an hour or 2 at most. He looked around before walking outside. He asked the girl, hey, since we're going to be waiting for a little while, care to play a game of chess? The moment the question left his mouth and he took out a portable chess set, he knew he made a mistake, judging by how Yukino's eyes lit up. Oh God, what demon have I awakened now? 2 hours and 32 chess games later. Naruto buried his head in his hands. That was absolutely embarrassing. He had lost 32 games in a damn row. Yukino was apparently a chess fanatic. He should have expected it given her bookish exterior, but now he knew rather than thought that she fit the stereotype of nerd. He looked over to Yukino, who kept asking, oh come on, one more game, it can't hurt, before he stood up and walked toward the cave mouth. Hey, where are you going? She asked him. He looked at her and said, there's a town about 5 miles away. I'm going to get your friend some clothes unless you and her would prefer that she go with us completely naked. Now then, if you'll excuse me. He walked out of the Jinjutsu and sank into a shadow. He's right, she thought. The only thing Haruka-chan has to clothe her is her Hitayate, since IWA law dictates that dead ninja be buried with them. I wonder how long he'll be. Her question was answered when he showed up barely 10 minutes later with clothing in hand. When she asked him how he had gotten to a town 5 miles away, bought the stuff, and gotten back so quickly, he just replied, being able to instantaneously go wherever I have been before is awesome. Appeared about 10 feet away from the shop's front door, picked up what I wanted, and sank into the shadows right in front of the shopkeeper as I got close to the register. His face was absolutely priceless. He is probably calling the local police as we speak, but it will be cold day in hell before they find this place. Yukino was rather worried at that, and when I say worried, I mean frantic. You stole that stuff? Are you crazy? We'll be listed as criminals. There will be wanted posters for us everywhere. We'll be. He just decided to interrupt her before she went too nuts and said, Yukino, think clearly for a moment. First off, I covered my features with a Jinjutsu before I went in, so even if wanted posters do show up, they will be looking for a middle-aged man with a pedophiliac smile, less hair than normal, and a bad case of leprosy. Even if I didn't, I doubt that there will be wanted posters put up throughout a country for a spot of shoplifting. And the only places our faces are going to be seen will be in a nice comfy spot in the IWA bingo book. We have raided a hidden village's morgue for the corpse of a powerful Jounin's body ripe with secrets. You will be listed as a B or A class, missing mean for sure due to your skill, maybe even S class due to your Jinchuriki status. When Haruka appears with you, she will be treated the same. I won't be on a wanted list due to my apparent age. People will just assume that I appeared as a child due to an illusion, and they will put a note in your profile that says something like, travels with an unknown shinobi of unknown power, or something like that. You already are a criminal, Yukino, face it. I doubt a few articles of stolen clothing will make your court sentence any heavier than the death penalty that you could expect from a wagakure if you're ever caught. He waited for a moment to let that sink in before continuing. Now, let's get Haruka these clothes so that she is decent when she travels with us, and then we shall get the hell out of here. I don't want to stay in this country any longer than necessary. He continued his walk toward the lab where the sleeping Haruka still was before remembering something. He turned and tossed a kunai to the ground at Yukino's feet. Oh, by the way, since you are missing me now, you may want to at least keep to the standard. Yukino knelt down and took the knife as Naruto entered the building and after a moment's hesitation, slashed her iwa hitayate, which she wore around her neck, through the middle. Naruto came out a minute later and handed her a bundle wrapped in paper. Also, I got you some new clothes since yours are in rather poor condition. I thought that it would be best if you woke up your friend and explained things to her. She will probably want to see a familiar face when she wakes up. I have examined her, and it is safe to wake her. Take your time. There are only legions of IWA ninja out for our blood. After that, he went and sat against the wall. Yukino, after a moment's thought, entered the laboratory. About 10 minutes later, Yukino and the now awakened Haruka walked out of the lab. Haruka was looking around at everything. She was wearing normal shinobi paints taped off at the ankle, standard kunoichi sandals, and a white Chinese-style shirt. She had her noticeably slashed iwa hitayate around her waist like a belt. There was a pouch full of ninja equipment at her waistline. Yukino was wearing a shirt of a tough dark material and black pants of similar design to her friends. A standard equipment pouch and kunai holder along with normal kunoichi sandals finished the outfit, and she had her hitayate around her neck, as usual. She was guiding her friend by the hand, and he heard Haruka saying, I only wish that we could get back at that find that killed me. Fiend, Yukino corrected her friend. Naruto sealed up the lab and put the scroll in its usual place before saying, You wish for revenge, and Haruno women wish they were born with big, beautiful tits instead of the equivalent of molehills. Not everyone gets what they want, but at least your dream will come true in time. Theirs won't. Anyway, Yukino explained the situation to you. Haruka nodded, carefully eyeing the person that supposedly brought her back from the dead, and he just said, Good. Then come on. The Fujino Mountains are about 60 miles away, and the cave we are looking for is rather deep in them. He started walking toward the cave mouth, the two kunoichi hurrying to catch up. Before he left, he turned around and asked Haruka, Oh, by the way, do you want to keep this? He held up the jar with Haruka's pierced heart. When he saw Haruka turn green, he just said, Come on, it will make a nice souvenir. She slapped the jar out of his hand, and it landed with a loud crack on the ground. Naruto looked at the jar and said, Geez, no one has a sense of humor anymore. Before walking on, the bookish Yukino trying to calm down her now fuming friend. 2 weeks and 80 miles later. The three were staying in a tent hidden by a jinjutsu provided by Yukino about a mile outside of Bubuk. The place was a rather quaint mining town under the control of an actually legitimate governor. Not a bit of corruption in the guy. That might explain why Naruto had heard rumors of ninja being hired to kill the guy in a few days. They had also had a mass grave robbing not too long ago. They were the 10 that died in the collapsed building. Proof that they weren't too far off from their goal. Yukino was currently using her abilities on a much smaller scale to try and locate the ledge she had seen the elusive hogback on 2 weeks ago. Getting there had been tough. IWA ninja were swarming everywhere you looked. It was the benefit of having an insanely obese ninja population. They had managed to escape the scrutiny of most of the groups after them, but one lucky, or not so lucky, depending on how you look at it, team had stumbled upon their camp one night as Yukino was preparing a jinjutsu to hide them. There were 3 of them, and they were all low to mid-jounin level. The 4 of them immediately sent out a barrage of shuriken when they recognized their target. Naruto, who had just left one of the 2 tents, blocked the projectiles with a wall of shadow donated from the trees and quickly distracted them. This distraction came in the form of 6 claws emerging from each of the 4 shadows of the 4 ninja. 2 hands grabbed each ninja by the hips and held them still as the remaining 4 divided their attention to their legs. Each leg had 2 hands grab it near the knee and suddenly twist. There was a slight pop as kneecaps were removed from joints and a quiet snap as bones broke. When the 4 were incapacitated, Naruto took them all out with a kunai to the neck each. An unsealed and resealed freezer and 4 bodies on meat hooks later. The only evidence of the hunter ninja's presence was the bloodstains on the ground from the pierced jugular veins, the shiny new equipment wielded by Yukino and Haruka, and the IWA bingo book in Naruto's hand. He looked through it and after a minute or two found an interesting entry. He showed Yukino a picture of herself in the A-class section that had all of her known data. Naruto pointed to a small note that said, accompanied by an unknown ninja of unknown power, presumably Jounin, that hides his appearance via Jinjutsu to appear as a child. There was also a pretty fat 30,000 Ryo bounty on her head too. When she finished reading her own dossier, Naruto looked at her, smiled, and said, "Told you, didn't I?" Aside from that encounter, their journey had been uneventful. Yukino got Naruto's attention when she found the place she was looking for. It was about 50 feet up the mountain, not too far from where they were now. Naruto nodded and left the tent, the 2 women behind him as he sealed it up. Without a second's hesitation, he walked to and started walking up the mountain, the 2 older women behind him. The ledge wasn't too narrow, nor was it too broad. A single person would have no difficulty standing on it, but 3 people were a bit much. Naruto didn't doubt that there was an easier way to get up there somehow. Naruto, after a moment's thought, slowly pushed a hand through the seemingly solid rock wall before walking through it entirely. Haruka and Yukino weren't far behind him. Naruto walked into a well-illuminated cave. There wasn't much to be said for the place really. If he didn't see Hogback here, and if it weren't for the torches on the walls, he would have said that it was uninhabited. He walked into a 10-foot-long torchlit corridor before he broke a tripwire. He looked at the broken string with a bit of apprehension. No traps went off. No alarms went off, at least no obvious ones. He decided that it must be a silent alarm, a warning system that didn't let the enemy know they were detected. He continued in, keeping watch for any traps. After traveling through a sparsely furnished living room, he finally found one of the 2 he was looking for. A tall man with the face of a beast, clad in a black coat, and wearing an odd hat stepped around the corner and without any preempt lifted his hand, palm facing Naruto, and growled, "Dead man's hand." A blast rocketed toward the young shadow user, which was blocked by said shadows. Not wanting to bother with Absalom any further, but not wanting to hurt him too badly, he manipulated the beast man's own shadow. A pair of hands emerged from Absalom's shadow, grabbed the beast man's ankles, and pulled his legs out from under him. A few seconds later, when he was done kissing the stone floor, he pointed his hand at Naruto again. This time the hands did their work before Absalom could attack. They lifted him up and slammed him back into the ground, stunning the amalgam of man and animal. He told the 2 kunoichi following him to watch the knocked-out creature as he continued on. Naruto walked into the room Absalom was hiding in and found 3 doors. A bit of exploration later, and he discovered that 2 of them were the bedrooms of Absalom and Hogback, while the 3rd was Hogback's laboratory, where he found the skilled, yet elusive doctor. He found Hogback dissecting a human corpse. There was an open coffin leaning against the wall alongside 9 others, 3 of which were also opened. Hogback didn't really react to Naruto's intrusion like he thought he would. He just looked up, put down his instruments, and said, "Hello. So why are you here, and how did you find this place?" Naruto stayed silent for a moment due to mild surprise. He was expecting something more loud and frightened rather than detached calm. After a moment, Hogback reached under the table before him and pulled out a gun from his own time that had been stuck to a magnetic strip under the table. He pointed the gun at Naruto, who recognized the weapon thanks to Kyuubi's memories, cocked it, and asked Naruto the same question again. In other words, "Who are you? And how did you find this place?" Naruto smiled and said, "Well, my name is Uzumaki Naruto. I found this place because I saw you on the ledge outside, and I came here to give you a very interesting offer." Hogback adjusted the gun to point right at Naruto's head and said, "Oh, and what's that? If I don't like your answer, I will have to put a hole between your eyes, you understand. Naruto nodded and just said, in exchange for the assistance of you and Absalom, I will return to you the power and authority you had as members of Gecko Moria's 3 enigmas. Hogback almost dropped his gun in shock. How does this boy know about Moria or about Thriller Bark? No one other than the zombies on that island, and those weaklings in the forest knew what we were called either. Never mind the fact that Thriller Bark fell centuries ago, and no one except me and Absalom have lived long enough to remember the times of the Grand Line before the Red Line fell. I must find out more. Hogback reaffirmed his hold on the gun. Naruto could have taken out the doctor by now, but he wanted the man to come along willingly. Hogback said, with clear distrust in his voice, really? Tell me, how does a boy know about things that are in no living record? Gecko Moria was defeated centuries ago, and Thriller Bark with him. The only living people who should know about that place are Absalom and I. How did you find out? And even more importantly, how do you plan to give us back what we lost when Thriller Bark fell? Naruto smiled and said having access to a demon's memories is a powerful asset, Hogback-san. As for how I can give you back what you lost that day, well, he had large claws come out of the shadows around the room, shocking the doctor. I have the abilities that you required from Gecko Moria to create zombies, those abilities, and more. I have already made around 50 zombies using the methods you created. I have even improved upon them. Recovering from his mild shock, Hogback asked, with a bit of suppressed hope in his voice, "Oh, is that right? Well, how have you improved upon my designs then, Naruto-san?" Naruto smiled openly then and said, "Well, I have made them fireproof for one thing. The second is that I have developed a way so that it is safe to kill the Shadow's original owner and not kill the zombie with him." Hogback actually dropped the gun this time, and it clattered to the floor. "I am possible," he muttered. Naruto smiled and said, "Not so. It is like I told you, Hogback-san. I can give you back what you lost at Thriller Bark, that and more. However, though I can make zombies easily enough, I need a medical expert to assist me. You have far more experience in creating zombies than I do, so your creations will be superior to my designs. That is why I did not try to harm you. If I couldn't have found you useful, I would have killed the both of you by now to prevent word of the zombies' weakness from spreading once they become known. Now then, I trust you will agree to my deal. It is simple enough. Serve me as you served Gecko Moria. Create zombies for me to animate. It is simple enough." Hogback nodded. He knew that this was the opportunity of a dozen lifetimes he was being offered. The time he spent at Thriller Bark was the most successful time of his life. Once the Mugiwara crew defeated Moria, that all went down the drain, but now he had a chance to get it all back. Naruto just said, "Come on, we need to go wake up Absalom," before he walked through the door. Hogback followed him quickly, afraid that this might be a dream. After they had woken up Absalom and he agreed to the same deal that Hogback had, the 5 of them sat down in the living room. Naruto and Hogback sitting in the 2 chairs while Absalom and the 2 girls leaned against the wall. Naruto started the discussion. "Okay, first thing, we have to get out of Tsuchi no Kuni and fast." Absalom looked at him and said, "Why is that, Naruto-sama?" Naruto looked at the beast man and said, "Well, Iwagakure is going to be hunting high and low for these 2 here, since one of them is the Jinchuriki they have long abused. Didn't you notice the slashed Hitayatesh?" Without waiting for any response, he continued, "Once out of the country, we are going to get you 2, he indicated Hogback and Absalom, to a safe place. Hogback will need to begin his work into creating more powerful soldier-class zombies, though you can come with us if you wish, Absalom." He gave the man a moment to think, and he responded, "Why not? I would like to see how the world has changed recently. I will need to see any possible terrain we may one day be fighting on." Naruto nodded, pleased. Absalom was a powerful fighter, and more importantly, an excellent commander. Why else would Moria give him the job of commanding his most powerful zombies? Naruto continued on, "Good. It will also probably help to see a familiar face when I attempt to recruit Perona." "Perona?" The both of them yelled at the same time. Hogback continued on, "Perona is alive? But how?" Naruto looked at the doctor and said, "Her powers. You know that she could separate her spirit from her body, right?" Hogback nodded and he continued, "Well, a year or so after she was defeated by Bartholomew Kuma, she was faced with a powerful foe that had wounded her fatally. In a last-ditch effort to survive, she left her body, which died shortly after, and ever since then she has been a ghost trapped on Earth, though she is just as powerful as you remember. Hogback and Absalom were shocked into silence. Perona was actually around all this time, they thought. They had both believed that she had died at Thriller Bark. That will be the main goal of the journey from here on out, to find and recruit Perona, the Ghost Princess. It will be difficult since she doesn't even have a physical body anymore. But if we can find her, with Absalom vouching for me combined with what I have planned to offer her in return, I think we can do it. What are you planning to offer her, Naruto-sama? Naruto just smiled and said, "Oh, you'll see." Naruto's hidden safe house. The five of them emerged into a sparsely furnished room with walls of stone. There was only one door leading from that room elsewhere, and there was no light, which was how Naruto got them there. "Where is this place, Naruto-san?" Haruka asked the one who brought her back from the grave. "This, my dear Haruka-chan," Naruto began, "is a place that I have been constructing over the past 2 years. It is a network of caves dug into the Hokage mountain of Konoha. The only real way in is through my Kage Hoka technique. The only passages to the surface are the passageways left for air, and those are no wider than a drinking straw. There is no way in, no way out, and there is a year's supply of food and water for 2 people. But, Naruto-san, how did you create this place if there is no surface entrance? You would have had to start digging somewhere." Haruka persisted. Naruto smiled and replied, "Very true, Haruka-chan, very true. I started this cave system from a small chamber that I discovered in the rock of the mountain. Nobody knows about this place, not even the Hokage. I also built several seals into the infrastructure. The only way to find this place without being told about it is to break through the mountain and find it by accident. Any detecting jutsu, no matter how strong or sophisticated, will show only solid rock inhabiting this space." He turned to Hogback and said, "This is where you will be working, Doctor, at least for now. I will give you plenty of material to work with, of course." Hogback nodded, happy to be getting to work, and asked, "So, what are your plans now, Naruto-sama?" Naruto coolly replied, "We'll discuss that later. In the meantime, I suggest that you get settled. I will be back in a few minutes with the necessary material for you to begin your work." Naruto then walked into the shadows and vanished. They waited in silence for a moment before Hogback turned to the 2 young girls. He decided that he should get to know more about the mysterious Naruto. "I do not believe that we have been properly introduced." He began, "My name is Dr. James Hogback, and you are?" After a moment of being uncomfortable under the extremely strange man's gaze, Haruka's more jump-into-things head-first side took control, and she said, "My name is Suzushiro Haruka, and this is my friend Kikukawa Yukino. Nice to meet you." Hogback seemed pleased by at least getting an answer out of the 2 and continued, "Yes, nice to meet you as well. Tell me, what do you know of the good Naruto-sama? You have known him longer after all." Haruka looked at him strangely before saying, "I really don't know him all that well. We haven't talked much." "What do you know of him, Yukino?" Absalom, who had been examining one of the walls, perked up his ears. Yukino looked a bit flushed and embarrassed to be asked a direct question by Haruka, but she continued on anyway. "Well, we have talked a little." "And?" Haruka inquired. Yukino continued, "And he seems nice enough on the surface. He is kind to those that are kind to him in turn, and is overall a very generous person. He is very strong, that is obvious, and he is very patient as well." Haruka and Hogback looked a little let down. "Well, that's a lot to go on, isn't it?" Haruka mumbled under her breath. Yukino continued on as though uninterrupted. "However, that is only the facade he shows most people." "Huh," said both Doctor and Jonin simultaneously. Yukino continued, "He seems sincere and kind on the surface, but I believe that it is an elaborate act. I have been studying him without fail ever since I met him, and have discovered several things about him that he probably doesn't want us to know. Things about him, personally. I have learned that he is not a trustworthy person. He would betray anyone, no matter how close they were to him, if he believed that their death would serve him more than they would alive. If someone or something isn't useful to him, he would discard them without any remorse. He is obviously well-informed, too well-informed. I believe that he most likely has spies or undercover workers in several governments for him to amass such information. I know that he is the QB Jinchuriki and is slowly gaining her powers, though he confided in me that he doubts that he will ever be able to control them well. He is also patient. He has no trouble in waiting for his goals to be completed, be it a month, a year, or 20 years. He also hates being lied to and can tell when people do lie to him. If he was going to kill someone, he wouldn't care how it was done. He would be just as satisfied planting a bomb to go off in someone's office as he would thrusting a sword through his heart. And I have concluded that he has no forgiveness for anyone who betrays him. Overall, he is an extremely dangerous person and not to be underestimated due to his age. Of course, these are all my speculations and my speculations only. The three of them looked at her, stunned. Haruka stammered out, how did you figure out all of that, Yukino? Yukino looked down and said, well, he got a bit talkative when I defeated him at chess. All conversation was cut short though, as Naruto reappeared, 2 scrolls in hand. Without a word, he crossed into another chamber. A minute or so later, there was a large puff of smoke that went through the cave. Naruto came back and told Hogback, I have established a freezer for you to work with. There are several dozen bodies inside. He handed Hogback the second scroll and said, this scroll contains the blueprints for the zombies I have created so far. I need you improve them as much as possible. Hogback nodded and took the scroll. Naruto waved a hand toward the center of the room, and the shadows moved from the corners of the room, forming a circular table. Other shadows came together and formed 5 black chairs. Naruto sat down in one of them and motioned for the others to join him, which they did. Naruto gestured again, and the tabletop changed into a very detailed map of the elemental countries. He began, as you probably guessed, these are the elemental countries. Perona could be anywhere in them, aside from Tsuchi no Kuni and Hai no Kuni. That leaves a lot of ground to cover, way more than is possible to cover in the remaining 9 months of my training trip. What I need is the opinion of you 2-inch at this. He gestured to Hogback and Absalom. I need your opinion of where she most likely is. Anything that you can remember about her, places she liked, things like that. Anything you know about her that could make the search easier. The 2 several-hundred-year-old beings stayed silent in thought for a moment before Hogback said, she usually kept to herself. I only know that despite being a fruit user, she enjoyed being near the ocean. She also liked extremely creepy places, the creepier the better. If we are going by that, then any landlocked nations are probably not the place that you are looking for. A country with a beach, or an island nation is much more likely. He looked at the beast man among them and said, Absalom, you knew her longer than I did. Do you know anything more? Absalom stayed silent for a moment before saying, Perona joined up with us shortly before you did, Doctor. You are right, though. She did enjoy the water for some strange reason. She said that it reminded her of her home, but from what I know of her and her tendencies. The immense creature leaned over the map, and with one claw circled 3 country names. From what I know of her, if she would be anywhere, it would be one of these 3 places. Mizu no Kuni, Umi no Kuni, and Nami no Kuni. Those are the most likely places that she would be. Other than that, I have no idea. Naruto nodded and after a second of thought asked Absalom, are you sure that she would be there, more likely than anywhere else? Why those 3 in particular? Absalom pointed to Mizu no Kuni and said, Mizu no Kuni is famous for its thick mists, which is how Kirigakure got its name. The place is surrounded by water, and the mists add in a certain air about the place that would appeal to her, if I remember her correctly. He pointed to Umi no Kuni. Umi no Kuni is also surrounded by water and has been plagued by rumors of the Kama monster. This adds in a certain amount of fear, which would also catch Perona's interest. He pointed to Nami no Kuni. Nami no Kuni is an island nation, like Umi no Kuni. In addition to that, it has deep forests which mist from the sea tends to collect in. That seems perfect for someone like her. He looked at Naruto. I give no guarantee that she is in any of those places, but from the places listed on this map, those 3 seem the most likely. Naruto nodded and said, well, it looks like we have a plan. We will enter and investigate those 3 countries. It will take most of my remaining time to do so, but we will just have to do the best we can. While we are gone, I expect you to create as many marionettes as possible, Hogback, and also do your best to improve my current blueprints." He looked over to see the doctor already nosed deep into the scroll containing Naruto's designs. The doctor said, "One step ahead of you, Naruto-sama. I have already examined most of these, and I cannot see any simple means of improving them. They are excellent soldier-class zombies." Naruto nodded as Yukino asked soldier class. Naruto explained to the bespectacled girl, the zombies of Thriller Bark had several classes. The first were soldier-class zombies. These were reasonably strong and numerous. I would say that my soldier-class zombies are all mid to high Chunin level, since they have the shadows and therefore the techniques of A and BU. A few of them working together could defeat a Jounin or two. The next is the class known as a general zombie. These are the elite, strong and smart enough to take on a Jounin one-on-one. A few of them working together could give a Kageo a run for his money. The final class was the special class zombie. Hogback only created one, and it ended up destroying half of Thriller Bark. A special class zombie would be strong enough to combat a summon boss or one of the lesser bijou. That is the main reason I recruited Hogback. While I can create soldier class zombies with ease, I have extreme difficulty in creating general class zombies and cannot begin to create a special class. In fact, I only have one general class zombie, and he isn't finished yet. He is made to contain one specific shadow after all. Anyway, moving on, our first stop will be Nami no Kuni, since from there we can get ships from there to Omi no Kuni, and from there to Mizu no Kuni. Agreed. Everyone nodded. There was little choice. 1 week later, the four of them had made it. They were in Nami no Kuni. Not that it was anywhere easy to get there. The only way for them to get to the island chain was through boats, and even then, it had to be a bit enough one for Absalom to ride upon invisibly, so as not to draw attention to his features. Plainly speaking, it was a gigantic pain in the ass for them all. They saw the beginnings of a bridge being built, but it wouldn't be completed for several years at least. Naruto and the rest were staying in 3 tents made for 2 people each. Naruto and Absalom kept one to themselves each, and the 2 girls slept together. What most of them didn't know was that he had a 4th tent, but he just kept the girls sleeping together to embarrass Yukino, since Haruka moved a lot in her sleep, and usually ended up hugging the Jinchuriki before everyone woke up, leading to one of the deepest blushes the blonde had ever seen every morning. He found it all funny as hell. Naruto was actually wandering around the town near the soon-to-be bridge with Absalom, keeping himself invisible nearby. Strong and smart he may be, but inconspicuous he was not. Naruto was searching for possible ways to spend the time in the city, as well as keeping an eye out for any particularly strong people that might make good marionettes if handled properly. He had set up a system with Hogback using the portrait zombies. He had a full-sized one in the cave system, so he could send things to the doctor, such as sealing scrolls full of material, and vice versa using the smaller portrait he kept in his coat. It was very useful, all things considered. Naruto had been walking around town for several hours, trying to find something worth his time, while Yukino searched the country for anything that might indicate that woman's presence. From what he knew, Perona had been wandering around various countries, causing entire towns to have emotional breakdowns to try and ease her boredom. All well and good, he reasoned, but she was still hard as hell to find at any point in time. He had told Yukino to be especially careful to look for cities full of horrifyingly depressed people. That would probably mean that they had hit the jackpot and found her earlier. It really is terrifying, Naruto thought. It really is terrifying what that woman can do. Perona's abilities revolved around spirits and ghosts. Her main tactic was a type of ghost that, should it go through someone, it would cause that person to have an immense emotional breakdown, losing all will to live and any focus whatsoever. As far as he knew, no one was immune to this effect, since the thing that induced it was intangible and couldn't be stopped by any physical object. The ghost would just pass through it. It was a pretty nasty technique. More than one fight that Naruto knew of had been decided through sheer force of will and stubbornness. Being able to completely take that away from someone would leave nothing more than a sobbing wreck. The only person that had ever been able to resist that effect was that pirate sniper, Usopp, and he was the first one to ever defeat Perona. But that guy was unique, a freak of nature, and most importantly, long dead. In addition to that attack, she could also call upon ghosts that were explosive in nature. The smaller ones could blow holes in solid concrete a foot deep. The larger ones would blow away a building. Combined with the fact that she could create such ghosts without limit would make her an extremely useful person when it came to dealing with a large number of opponents or destroying a tough target. A combination of the two techniques, removing someone's will to live, effectively immobilizing them, and then blowing them away with the explosive ghosts was a very potent tactic. She could also leave her body indefinitely. Existing as a ghost after hiding her body somewhere else was one of the other things she could do. Someone that couldn't be hurt and could pass through walls would make an excellent short-range scout. Even more dangerous was the fact that she could still attack while in that intangible form, yet no one could hurt the spirit body. All things considered, Perona the Ghost Princess was not one to be taken lightly, no matter who you were. Her abilities made her one of the more dangerous people in existence at the moment. No one could survive one of the blasts from the larger ghosts head-on. No one. That being said, if she managed to hit you with the negative hollow that removed a person's will to live, it was over shortly afterward. The fact that she was so dangerous was the main reason he wanted her on his side, before anyone else found her and realized what she could do. With any luck, what he had to offer her would make her work for him, and maybe a bit more down the line. While Naruto was lost in his musings, he had wandered into the port area, where dozens of ships docked and departed with cargo every day. All days except today, apparently, as what he saw was a completely empty place. He looked around for a second before stumbling upon the reason behind the desertion. It was a large sign that said, "Under new management, Gata Transport." Naruto looked at the sign for a second before smiling. He just thought of an excellent way to pass the time. 2 hours later, Naruto was sitting at a small dango shop eating lunch. Absalom, as he was invisible, wasn't able to eat much, but if you looked closely, a stick of the dumplings would vanish every so often. Naruto was currently thinking. For the last 2 hours, he had launched inquiries into the dear Gatu. Apparently, the man was slowly but surely buying every port and major shipping company in the country. Most of the people didn't see where this was going, but Naruto did. When a rich man gets a monopoly, it is never good for the common man. If his prediction was right, Gata would buy a monopoly on the shipping trade in Nami no Kuni, and once he did, he would raise prices through the goddamned roof, sucking the country dry for every last Rio. Mind you, he was about the only person in the country who realized where this was heading, but everyone else would realize it too. Maybe a few months too late to do jack squat about it, but they would realize it. Now, an ethical and moral person in that position would do something like try to warn the populace or try to stop Gatu from obtaining his monopoly, and by doing so, he would save the people untold grief. Naruto, however, was not an ethical or moral person. He had every intention of getting something out of this situation. So an entire country suffered for his greed. Who was he to give a damn? No one, that's who. As far as the blonde was concerned, the entire world could face Armageddon the day after he died. As long as he wasn't affected by it, anything could happen to anyone. The main question was how to get something out of his knowledge of the very rich Gata's plans. It was a good thing that he had a very good plan on how to do so. In fact, he would kill 2 birds with 1 stone. He ate the last of his dango and stood up before walking off to the campsite where he had left Yukino and Haruka. He had some new business in Nami no Kuni, and it would involve a certain diminutive and rich businessman. 2 hours later, Gata's office. Naruto snuck Gata's office, where he was currently sorting through a bunch of documents. Even incredibly rich men had to deal with paperwork. Massive businesses didn't run themselves, and neither did the country-conquering variety. He allowed himself to be seen by the short man just after he put the documents into a bulging folder that was marked Nami no Kuni, Ports and Trade, and wrapped a thick rubber band around it to keep it from bursting open. The first thing the short man did was gasp loudly and reach for a button that probably called some form of security, be it thugs or ninja. Naruto didn't particularly care to find out. As a result, the intercom was covered in a dome of darkness, and Gatu was strapped to his own chair by several bands of shadows so thin that they could have been painted on. He could still speak, he just couldn't move. It wasn't all that uncomfortable either. Naruto just sat down in the chair facing the man's desk and looked at the man who was reeking with fear at the moment. Naruto kind of liked the smell of fear, but it wasn't really called for in this case. He started off, "Calm down, Gata-san. I am not here to hurt you." Gata stopped breathing so hard and began to calm down, though he looked wary. After all, What kind of person traps a person if they didn't intend them some kind of harm? Naruto continued on, standing up from the rather uncomfortable chair and pacing around the room. No, I am not here to hurt you. In fact, I am here to make your life absolutely wonderful. You can join the conversation at any time, by the way. Gata began to get his brain in order before asking this strange man, who are you? Naruto smirked as he examined a fake deer's head mounted on the wall, glad to hear that I'm not talking to myself. As for who I am, well, that changes depending on who you talk to. To some I am master, to very few I am friend, to many I am demon, but to you, I am benefactor, a business partner even. Gata looked at the man strangely. A business partner? The diminutive man continued on, oblivious to the strange stare he was getting from the room's other occupant. Yes, a business partner. That fits the bill nicely. Sorry for strapping you down, by the way, but I couldn't have you causing a fuss. Anyway, I have come upon your plans regarding the monopolization and subjugation of Nami no Kuni. Gata's fear went into overdrive. If anyone knew about that before he was ready, he was screwed, and he knew it. What do you want from me? He asked. Let me guess, you're going to try and blackmail me, eh? Dangle some information over my head and wrap me around your finger? Or are you some do-gooder looking to convince me to change my ways? Naruto looked over at the scared and somewhat angry businessman before sighing and saying, Oh, please, why would I want to stop you? I don't live in this country, so why should I care? Blackmail you? Definitely not. That never ends well for either party. No. In fact, I have come here to assist you in your little conquest. For a reasonable sum of cash, I am willing to provide the best combatants that you will ever find. Gata once more looked at the man oddly. What you mean, ninja? I could just hire some nuke nin. No one cares if they go missing once the job is done. If you're some sort of advertiser for a hidden village, you should spruce up your technique. It definitely used some work. Naruto turned and faced the man. Good. He's getting his sharp tongue back, a good sign. Maybe we can finally get some work done here. He walked over to the man while saying, Ninja? Not quite. I said the best combatants that you will ever find. You will need more than a little muscle to complete your goals, and for an honest monthly payment, I am willing to let you rent them. Ninja, you see, have one major flaw. They can die. The fighters that I am offering you, however, cannot. Gata was unbelieving. A group of immortal warriors? The only immortal person that Gata knew of was that hiding guy in the bingo book. He read through the thing occasionally, looking for ninja that are strong, but not too strong for him to offer work to. It was understandable that he was skeptical. Naruto looked at the man and said, Don't believe me, huh? Okay, fair enough. It is a bit tough to swallow, but I am more than willing to give a demonstration. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a picture frame. He tapped the glass, and after a few seconds he said, Get me Ray. A few seconds later, a whispery voice that made shivers run up Gata's spine came from the strange device. The voice said, She is on the other side, awaiting your orders, master. Naruto nodded and said, Good. Tell her this. Take SC 1 through SC 10 and put them in a scroll. Give them to the portrait to give to me. A whispery confirmation was heard, and after a few minutes, an entire hand emerged from the frame, holding a medium-sized scroll. He took it and said, Dismissed, and put the frame back from where he got it. Naruto opened the scroll and inserted chakra into the 10 symbols inscribed on the paper. 10 rotted, sewed together corpses knelt before him. You called upon us, master. The one with a number 1 tattooed upon its forehead spoke. Naruto turned and spoke to Gata. These, my friend, are the warriors I am talking about. Incapable of dying and extremely strong. I am willing to lend them to you for the simple sum of 300,000 Ryo a month. Think about it for a moment. A squadron of invincible warriors doing your bidding. You would be unbeatable to any who would cross you. It would make your conquering of the country much easier. Why send in an army of hired muscle when you can send in 10 who cannot be defeated? You would definitely save money in the long run, don't you think? Gata thought about it, and thought about just how weird this was. Just who is this guy? He thought. Naruto continued on, and just in case you do not believe me. Naruto made a motion with his hand, and his axe appeared there. He swung it down and cut off the head of one of the 10 kneeling before him. Despite the fact that it was a lethal blow, no blood erupted from the wounds. The body did not drop to the floor, It kept still in a kneeling position. The only noise was from the severed head, which only asked, "Master, may I reattach my head?" Gato was in absolute shock. He had never seen anything like that before. He saw the value behind this and the excellent deal that he was being offered, especially when the man nodded and the headless body stood, walked over, and picked up its own head before sticking it on, before kneeling before him again as he was before, the wound already sealed. He readily agreed to his terms. Naruto smiled. That was too easy. He handed Gato a card with a number on it. He said to him, "Wire the money to that number once a month, every month. I am glad to see that you made the right choice." He gestured and the bands of darkness holding Gato captive vanished. He said, "There is also a place for you to send messages to should you require my presence given any trouble concerning the merchandise." He turned to the kneeling corpses and said, "Listen here. Until I say otherwise, you are to call that man." He pointed to Gato, "Master, you are to obey his every command that does not involve betraying me until I say otherwise. Do you understand?" There was a mumbled, "Yes, Master." Naruto just said, "Good. Now then, Gato-san, I believe our business is done here." Gato stood up and crossed over to Naruto and said while holding out his hand, "Yes, definitely. What should I call you?" Naruto shook the man's hand and said, "I told you already. To you, I am benefactor. I believe this is the beginning of a wonderful business relationship, Gato-san." "Oh yes, most certainly," the small businessman exclaimed, nearly salivating at the thought of what he could do with the new help as the strange man vanished into thin air. Naruto knew the man would keep his word. He smelled the truth on his words. 2 hours later, Naruto came back to the campsite where he left Yukino, Haruka, and Absalom. He said to them, "Okay, thanks to Yukino-chan, we know that Perona is not in Nami no Kuni. Oh well, better luck next time. Now then, pack up and come on. I have a boat ready to get us out of here." He moved over to his own tent and sealed it up. The others quickly did the same, following the small blonde. He was happy. He had a steady source of income, and he had managed to find a way to give the soldier class a field test. So far, so good. But they had a boat to catch, to Umi no Kuni. 2 hours later, they were staying in a decent-sized hotel in the port town on Hahajima, the largest island in the country. Yukino was in the forest, using her abilities to look for their target, while Haruka was guarding her as she searched. As the girls were out in the woods, Naruto and Absalom were doing what they did in Nami no Kuni. In other words, they were looking for some way to pass the time, while Yukino determined whether or not they were wasting time there in the first place. Absalom was currently looking up the skirt of some young fishermen's daughters while Naruto was looking up rumors concerning the Kaima creature that was plaguing the waters around the country. Naruto was curious about the creature. He was also curious about what secrets that Kakaijima, the island where the beast was said to appear, held. Apparently, anyone that sailed too close to the island was never seen again. That combined with the Kaima monster targeting ships recently meant that things would certainly get out of hand within the next few years. Naruto knew that Orochimaru once had a compound in the area, but that it was abandoned shortly before the Serpent Sannin's defection. He was wondering if the old compound and the Kaima monster could be connected. Maybe an escape lab experiment? Judging by Orochimaru's previous work, he decided that it was quite likely. And if that was the case, then who knew what sort of stuff he could find in that compound? He didn't know where it was, but judging by the disappearances, Kakaijima seemed to be a good guess. Naruto decided his basic plan of action. 1. He would find something to eat and hopefully dissuade Absalom from stalking that fisherman's daughter. 2. He would wait for the results of Yukino's search for their target. And 3. He would pay the very mysterious Kakaijima a little visit, Kaima monster or not. A possibility of finding out about the Snake Sannin's experiments was too good to pass up, especially since the compound in Umi no Kuni was where he did most of his work on the cursed seal. Information on that would be worth the entire trip to Umi no Kuni, whether or not they found Perona. The group's apartment, 3 hours later. After he managed to prevent Absalom from stalking that girl, they met up with Yukino and Haruka and returned to the hotel. Yukino's report was less than satisfactory, but it could have been worse. Apparently, there was an old story of a city vanishing in a single night in a massive explosion, and it was noted that the people of that town had been cripplingly depressed the day before it happened, but Perona was not in the country. It was more than likely that she was here at some point, but she definitely was not there now. Frustratingly elusive woman aside, they at least had a lead. She was there a few years ago. That was a good sign. As for the business at hand, it was obvious that things were not what most considered normal. Fishing boats and commercial ships had been attacked and looted at random for the last 6 months or so, and anyone who got too close to Kikaijima never returned. The only person who had returned from Kikaijima was a local outcast by the name of Isaribi. She was a young girl that had been ostracized due to actually returning from Kikaijima. Apparently people, in their idiotic fear of the unknown, believed her to be a monster, an unnatural being that did not belong. This did not sit well with Naruto, who faced similar treatment from Konoha. Kikaijima, the Kaima monster, and the mysterious girl Isaribi. Naruto thought. Those three things are definitely connected, but how? Naruto told them what he had planned. He started off, okay, here's what we are going to do. A boat filled with expensive merchandise is going to sail tomorrow. This is a monthly shipment to a large market in Mizu no Kuni. These shipments are usually attacked by this Kaima. As a result, there is a good chance that the Kaima will appear and attack the boat. Absalom, you will trail this Isaribi girl during this time. Absalom nodded and Naruto continued on. As for the attack itself, it will be observed by Yukino-chan. She will also use her abilities to scout out Kikaijima today. Yukino nodded. Haruka-chan and I will infiltrate Kikaijima the day after tomorrow, using the information granted to us by Yukino-chan, understood? They all nodded, and then Naruto said, good. Yukino-chan, you had best get the scouting done before it gets too dark out. Haruka-chan, you should go with her. I am going to get some sleep. See you in the morning. Without another word, Naruto laid down and was out like a light. Absalom took a second bed, being rather tired from stalking women that caught his eye. Yukino and Haruka shared a look and left. The next morning, Naruto woke up before anyone else did. He looked over the room. Absalom was still sleeping, as were Haruka and Yukino in the third bed. Naruto cracked a huge grin at the position the two were in. Haruka had been moving in her sleep again. At the moment, her head was using Yukino's chest as a pillow, and one of her hands was resting just above the hem of Yukino's pants. Naruto snuck over and quietly woke Yukino up. He made sure that she couldn't see him when she woke up. She looked down, and Naruto swore that she invented a new shade of red. She couldn't really move that well since one of her arms was trapped under Haruka. As though awakened by Yukino's return to consciousness, Haruka opened her eyes and after a second realized the position she was in. She moved away so quickly she fell off the bed. Naruto laughed his ass off at the both of them. Then and there, he managed to ask them, so, I take it you two had a good night? Ha ha ha. A moment later, a shadow moved from the bed and blocked a thrown pillow. Absalom slept through the entire thing. An hour later, after waking up Absalom and eating breakfast, the beast man left to begin his job for the day, stalking a young girl. Yukino and Haruka left civilized areas so that Yukino could use her abilities to watch the attack. Haruka was there to guard her as she did so. The entire thing took a lot of concentration on the Jinchuriki's part, and she wouldn't be able to defend herself without letting the whole thing vanish. As a result, Naruto had jack squat to do until the next day, so he just wandered around town. He idly wondered when Yukino would finally tell Haruka how she felt. In his opinion, the sooner she told the other girl and got laid the better. It would probably help with her confidence problems. He also wondered if the bespectacled Jinchuriki could use Mokuton Jutsus. She had a plant monster sealed into her, so he supposed it was in the realm of possibility. He would have to investigate that later, though. He checked the time. He had 3 hours until noon, when the ship would launch. He guessed he would just have to find something to occupy his time until then. After that, he could go after it and watch Takuma attack. That was sure to happen. Yukino's scouting was second to none, but an eyewitness perspective would help in his planning. Depending on how powerful the beast was, he might have to call off the entire operation. Not likely, but possible. Hajime, the docks, 12 p.m. Naruto watched the workers load the boat with dozens of crates. The ship was undergoing its last-minute preparations for the week-long voyage to Mizu no Kuni, where they would sell it all for a large profit. That is assuming, of course, that they managed to get there. Naruto was thinking at the moment, If they are so afraid of a sea monster, why don't they just hire Kiri Ninja to escort the ship or something? Hell, since Kiri buys a decent percentage of the goods sold, they may even be able to get some kind of a discount. It's just stupidity bordering on insanity. Wait a second, I spoke too soon. Indeed he did, for at that moment, Naruto spotted the trio of Chunin who were probably there to protect the boat, judging by the fact that they were positioned around the boat at random points. Obviously from Kirigakure, if the Hittite they wore were real. This presented a problem. Naruto wanted this little robbery to go off without a hitch. He didn't want the thing dead, well not yet anyway. Konoha and its allies had a decent amount of sea trade, so if he could capture and tame it, or if it was sentient, convince the thing to work with him, it could be very useful down the line. If not, well no one would really miss the thing. Either way, he didn't want the Kaima to go down at the moment. He had a choice: let the ninja go on the voyage, and while it carries the risk of the creature being killed, it would give a good demonstration of how powerful it and its possible allies were. On the other hand, if he eliminated the ninja beforehand, the boat was guaranteed to be successfully robbed, and he would get a clear view of the people responsible and perhaps overhear something useful. Well, he reasoned if it dies, it probably wouldn't be worth the trouble anyway. Plus, a fight will be way more entertaining than a plain old robbing. He decided to let the ninja go. It would to see the creature's full abilities and, more importantly, entertain him since he was almost bored to tears at the moment. 1 hour later, the ocean. Naruto was following the ship via water, walking while being hidden by a Jinjutsu. He was wondering where the hell this thing was. It had been an hour already, and he had seen nothing. If the thing turned out to be fake like most people outside of the country believed, he would be really pissed off. He was kind of surprised that the Kiri ninja hadn't spotted him. The Jinjutsu wasn't that strong. It would easily fool any Jinnin. He could understand it getting by newbie Chunin, but experienced Chunin and above should have had little trouble dispelling it. It was a little risky putting an understrength Jinjutsu over himself given the presence of enemies, but this was a possibility to test the power of Kirigakure's Chunin. So far, unless they were new to their rank, which is unlikely due to the somewhat important nature of the mission they were on, he was extremely disappointed. Then he was shook from his musings by the ship suddenly shaking somewhat badly. Naruto smiled. At last the thing decided to get off its ass and do what it most likely did best. Naruto watched as the ship gradually slipped off of its course and plowed headfirst into a nearby rock formation. The people who managed to get a hold of something solid were a bit shaken up, but otherwise okay. As for those who didn't, well, one bashed his head into a rock, making a very pretty mural on said piece of stonework. The second skid about 3 yards on his nose before sliding into the water, unconscious, and the last, well, he got hit in the stones by a stone, sang soprano for about 2 seconds before blacking out and going under. Naruto chuckled under his breath, wishing he had brought a camera for that last one, and focused hard on engraving that moment in his memory. He watched the proceedings on the boat carefully. A man with white hair and a lab coat was telling the captain that if he gave up the cargo without a fight, he would spare the lives of him and the remaining 2 crew members. He looked for the ninja and found 2 of them with scalpels in their throats, most likely courtesy of the white-haired man, and the third was out cold. There was a broken bottle near him, probably a liquid that vaporized into a gaseous sleeping agent upon contact with the air. Naruto was watching the captain, wondering if the man would do as this stranger asked. Either way, he would end up dead. He smelled the lie from the white-haired man when he said the part about sparing them all. The captain denied the assailant's false offer and was promptly met with a scalpel to the neck. The remaining 2 crewmen drew their swords and charged the man, only to be stopped. One was hit by a blast of water and forced into the ocean, while the other was nailed by a sudden blast of wind and shredded. When Naruto looked over to where the blast had originated from and saw 2 figures, the first was a combination of fish and human that quickly went under the water and went in the direction of the fallen sailor. The second was a rather tall man with red eyes, white hair, and a small scar near his chin. This man looked toward the man wearing the lab coat and said, "Your orders, Amachi-sama?" The newly named Amachi looked over from the recently shredded body and said, "Start unloading the cargo. Mabashi should be here soon with the boat. Nice job with that sailor, by the way, Jean." The newly named Jean nodded and headed below deck. The fish creature that was most likely the Kaimon monster emerged from the depths and was greeted by Amachi. "Excellent job, Isaribi-chan," he said. She meekly replied, "Thank you, Amachi-sama." Naruto's eyes widened as he realized what had most likely been going on. If that Isaribi is the same Isaribi that I told Absalom to follow, then this guy must be behind the disappearances near Kikaijima since she returned from there. Judging by his attire, he is either a doctor, or more likely judging by his speed and knife work, a mednin. Those two, Jean, and the man coming with the boat, Mabashi, must be his assistants with whatever it is he is doing. He is probably conducting some form of research in Orochimaru's compound on Kikaijima, whether at his order or not has yet to be seen. Since they all refer to him as Sama, he is most likely the leader. If he is the leader, then the group must be small. More than likely the entire group is here, or will be once the mysterious Mabashi makes his entrance. If it wasn't small, then their leader wouldn't have come in person to help with grunt work. Since the entire team is here, I can eliminate the need to hunt through the maze that Orochimaru's compound almost assuredly is. If that is the case, then the matter is settled. Kill the two assistants and capture the remaining two. Naruto waited while the one called Jean brought up several crates as a boat showed up, steered by a red-haired man. He called out, "Hey, Amachi-sama. It seems everything went okay." Naruto noticed that silver flashed from the man's mouth, most likely a tongue stud or something. He didn't think about it anymore before a spike of darkness emerged from the shadow left by the boat, ran the guy through. Amachi and Isaribi looked around wildly as a similar spike ran through Jean. Thin bands of darkness trapped the arms and legs of the remaining two as Naruto stepped on board the downed ship and released the illusion concealing him.